Chapter 17. Zuemo slowly woke up. His head was still aching, but compared to the pain that had cut through his entire body, it was much less. Thinking of what had happened before he went unconscious, his face suddenly changed. He always had been one with a clear mind. Under the situation where his head was aware, and he could think clearly, he quickly organized the cause and result. Without any great need to think, it was definitely that black dandelion seed that was the culprit. The one that released the sword essence was him. And the one that pressured him was also that one. Thinking about it, Zuemo's heart burned in anger. That guy tried to play tricks on his head. He didn't know what he was getting into. He suddenly thought that he had said something before he went unconscious, and his face changed. Was it that he didn't persevere and had capitulated? Thinking about this, he quickly calmed his mind and entered his consciousness. When he enters the sea, he was stupefied. On the undulating hills, it was groups of large ancient trees. The green grass was like a carpet, spreading out in patches. Fine wild flowers mixed within the grass, adding hints of life. It was as though he walked into a forest. Before, his sea of consciousness was only empty space. This living and breathing scene in front of him, Zuemo was completely pinned to the ground. The scene in front of his eye far surpassed the limits of his understanding. He dazedly walked on the grass, feeling the softness of the grass under his feet. The smell of the green grass wafted into his nose. Zuemo was dazed. He was only an 8th level Lianqi low-level Xiuzha. When his gaze turned towards a hill without any trees, he instantly came back. He started to run like a maniac towards that hill. On the hill, a man dressed in black was sitting on a stele, black clouds moving around it. One hand was lying on the leg, another propped up his chin, his expression carefree and pleased. When he neared, Zuemo finally made out the black-clad man's appearance. A perfect face. Zuemo had never though men could be so handsome. An androgynous face, a high nose, the raven back hair covering up the left eye. The right eye as narrow and long as a blade. The serene crimson-red pupil was like a bottomless blood pool. The thin and wide lips eternally held a shallow yet strange curve. A piece of dark red rhombus-shaped crystals were in each earlobe, the wide black clothing soft and smooth, just like his hair. It gave off a black glow as it kept close to his body, full of a strange enticement. Zuemo blinked at his position, not knowing what to say. He was only the most normal disciple of a small sect. When had he ever seen someone so outstanding? I am called Pu. A sweet-sounding and beautiful voice. He propped up his chin, looking in interest at Zuemo, the curve of his mouth more evident. What are you called? Zuemo, he replied dumbly. He definitely was dreaming. Pu seemed to be just sitting there, but all the light in the sea of consciousness seemed to have been unconsciously sucked away to him. Zuemo had seen those female disciples at the eastern peak. Not one of them was better looking than Pu. When a man looked like this, he probably would want to cry. When this thought came out, Zuemo came back to awareness. Pu's enticing and shocking aura was instantly shattered by this humorous thought. Seeming to have noticed Zuemo returning to his senses, Pu smiled gently and wasn't irritated. He still used his melodious voice. It seems we will have to be in contact for a long time. But I believe we will have delightful interactions. Oh right, this is for you. Pu casually threw a glowing ball at Zuemo. On the surface of the ball, countless seals flashed. What is it? Zuemo instinctively received the glowing ball. Boom! It was as though he was struck by thunder, his body frozen. Countless characters were shoved into his mind, circulating relentlessly. Embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. Just a little plaything. It can repair your spirit. Count that as a greeting gift. Pu's tone was lazy. Even though I want to live for free, but there's no other way. Your sea of consciousness is so broken. Fix the sea of consciousness quickly. Otherwise I have to find another place again. He gracefully waved his hand. Zuemo, still unmoving at his spot, felt the space around his body tighten. When he opened his eyes, he found that he had come out of his sea of consciousness. His heart was suddenly terrified. Pu seemed to be even stronger than he had imagined. A person like this that he couldn't control in his consciousness. No wait, controlling his sea of consciousness. He had no joy at receiving. Embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. Terror spread through his body like poison. Managing to swallow his saliva and suppressing the terror in his heart, he pondered what to do. Report to the sect. In these 2 years, he had only seen the head of the sect once. That was when he had been picked by the leader, and when he opened his eyes. As to the other elders in Shirshu, he had never even met them. What he was really worried about was another conjecture. He was very suspicious. Pu was very likely to be a Yaoma. Such a beautiful Yaoma. He almost couldn't believe it. But for some reason, this suspicion was like a maggot burrowing into the bones, taking root in his mind, unable to be swept away. Zuemo had never seen Yaoma. All his ideas about Yaoma came from the sound tablet. When it mentioned Yaoma, it was killing, it was death and bleeding. But the between Yaoma and Shioja were that of natural enemies. He was very clear about that. Destroying Yaoma was the duty of each Shioja, no matter where. However, Zuemo was a beginner Shioja whose cultivation just reached the 8th level of Lianqi. Not speaking of destroying Yaoma, the Yaoma wouldn't even lower themselves to destroying him. What he was more worried about was that if someone else knew that a Yaoma was in his body, he definitely would be destroyed, ground until not a trace could be found. In the eyes of those higher-level Shioja, just an 8th level Lianqi like him, he couldn't even be considered cannon fodder. Maybe they would throw him straight into the Dantu furnace and get refined with the Yaoma. He couldn't help but shudder, his heart beating furiously. He quickly stopped those terrifying thoughts. In a daze, for the next 2 days, Zuemo seemed to not be in this mortal coil. He naturally had to practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Otherwise, before he could be crippled by Pu Yao, he would cripple himself first. Pu Yao, that was the new name Zuemo gave Pu. Regardless if he was a Yao, just how he looked, he deserved the character of Yao. The effects were very good. After a few days, half of his spirit had recovered. But Zuemo felt no gratefulness towards Pu Yao. Because he finally remembered the reason that his consciousness was wounded. It was Pu Yao's fault. In these few days, he didn't go to his sea of consciousness. If it was said at the first glance, the deepest impression Pu Yao left on Zuemo was enchanting. Now, enchanting changed to wicked. What did the guy really want? That was the true cause of the terror. Zuemo quickly found that his life became incomparably terrible. To a Shioja whose goal was to become a ling plant farmer, living was the most important. He decided to have a discussion with Pu Yao. Just like last time, Pu Yao sat on the steel idly, in the same black clothing. Seeing Zuemo, he smiled. That smile coming among the thick black smoke revolving around, it made him look full of evil. The conjecture about whether or not Pu was Yaoma jumped out again of its own accord. Zuemo's heart shook. He didn't lack in courage. But when the other was in complete control, he wouldn't do such a stupid thing as to express bravery. He suddenly noticed the stone steel under Pu's body. Half a person high, the stone steel was shrouded in black clouds. When he accidentally swept across the surface of the stone steel, he couldn't help but be shocked. Grave. This was a grave. It wasn't a stone steel, it was a gravestone. He instantly was frightened, his heartbeat speeding up. What? Wanted to find me for a chat? A lazy voice. He didn't know if it was this gravestone at fault. But Zuemo felt that Pu's voice was full of a kind of dark coldness that easily seeped into one's heart. Zuemo calmed his emotions, a fawning smile on his face. Did ye look, my cultivation is this weak, and my body is all bones, there isn't a few caddies of meat, not good to eat. Eat. Pu suddenly smiled. He opened his dark red right eye, slowly speaking. Speaking of delicious human meat, oh, that's so long ago. The best human meat, there's a lot to consider. The best is 16 or 17-year-old girls. Tender meat, crunchy bones. Yum yum. A scarlet tongue licked the lips, his expression full of reflection. Zuemo's heart was beating out of his chest. He forced a smile. Yeah, see, shouldn't you change a person? Change a person? Pu tilted his head, staring at Zuemo. What? You don't like it? Feeling that I took over your space. Being pierced by Pu's deep red right eyes, cold spread through Zuemo's heart. He hurriedly waved his hand. No. This is my honor. Honor. He seemed to be very satisfied with Zuemo's answer. Pu took away his gaze, his right eye closing again, his mouth absent-mindedly asking. In your generation of disciples, how many are Jindan? 10. Zuaemo shook his head. 8. Zuaemo continued to shake his head. 5. Zuaemo finally couldn't endure it. He felt the other was making fun of him. Not a single one. In the Shixiang of this generation, the highest cultivation is the last stages of Zhuji. For the first time, a shocked expression came onto Pu's face with his closed right eye. This made Zuaemo feel smug. After a while, Pu shook his head, sighing. No wonder you suck so much. Zuaemo almost spat blood. Pu opened his eye, his gaze once again landing on Zuaemo's body. He examined up and down, his hand propping up his chin, murmuring to himself. The body is really weak. Zuaemo was very irritated at how the other was discussing him like he was examining an object. But Pu's made his heart jump. Is something wrong? He couldn't ask hurriedly. He knew his body wasn't normal. The hard zombie face, and that dream that appeared countless times, it was like a thorn in his heart. Pu lifted his head, the hair in front of his forehead almost covering the left half of his face. The crimson right eye that wasn't covered glanced at Zuaemo's face, one corner of his mouth lifting. No problem. All right, you suck very much, but not to a terminal point. Pu returned back to his lazy tone of voice. I wanted to ask. Zuaemo decided to lay his cards on the table with Pu. He wanted to find out what Pu's true aims were. Oh right. Pu interrupted Zuaemo. His blood-red right eye narrowed, his thin lips lifting upward on an angle. Started practicing. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. How is it? Is the effects alright? Almost forgot to tell you. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation is good, but it has one pesky problem. Zuaemo's heart beat frantically. He had a bad feeling. Once embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation is started, it can't be stopped. Supposedly, if one can't get to the first embryonic breath in 3 months, there would be some minor problems. He raised his right hand, spreading his 5 fingers, the corner of his mouth raising higher, the fresh red of his eye even brighter. Really, it's just small pains such as blood flowing in reverse. Oh, did you know before I had a very creative friend? He was in charge of the torture prisons. Pu seemed to be telling a story, actively narrating. One time, he encountered a very hard nut. He tried everything but couldn't break open this guy's mouth. He then begged for this method from me. He sent a subordinate to pretend to be a criminal and near this guy. And then, using his subordinate's mouth, he passed this scripture over to him. Oh, you have to know I always admired this guy. Creative and patient. He said with a few hints of glee. Such a pity that this criminal didn't have much talent. 3 months, he didn't reach 1 embryonic breath. Oh, I always felt, it must have been that my friend purposefully left out a few words. And then, Zuaemo asked, his voice shaking. And then, the smile on Pu's face became even brighter. Cracked on the 31st day. But my friend was a soft-hearted one, and didn't kill him. Left him hanging for 3 months. Each day, he begged my friend to kill him. Listening to the exquisite and mellow wailing. Such an experience. Supposedly, when he died, oh, his soul just exploded like a firework, extremely beautiful. A bone-aching cold spread over Zuaemo's entire body. His pitiful nerves were like a spring that was pushed to its limits. All the accumulated anger exploded in one instant. He lost his rationality and screamed as he leapt at Pu. You perverse Rinyao. You'll kill you. It is pronounced a bit like Pu. The character used is the same one that is usually used for dandelion. Pill pellet. Common used as pills of immortality by Chinese emperors in search of eternal life. A gaming equivalent would be potions. Big Brother? Hong Kong slang for Thailand transvestites. It was then adopted as internet slang for males that use female avatars in MMORPGs. It's also used to describe girliness in boys. The literal meaning is human spirit. In this case here, Pu is really a Yao, and he does look androgynous. Chapter 18 Soup in the seclusion room. Zuaemo mediated with his legs in the lotus position. He was furiously practicing embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. The damned embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. The damned Puyao. He cursed the maniac countless times. After exploding yesterday night, he was brutally oppressed. His consciousness was once again heavily wounded, torn to pieces by Pu Yao. The result of the wounds in his consciousness was the heart-wrenching pain. Now, without needing Pu Yao's urging, he furiously practiced embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. Once his head cooled down, Zuaimo wanted to cry. That night, he should have never gone to the Ling fields. Thinking about Pu Yao, that coldness and cunning that could burrow into the bones, it was like a venomous snake slowly sliding up the bottom of his pants. That uncontrollable terror spread through the entire body. The brutal suppression last night. It also made him attain a deep understanding of an unattainable gap between the power levels of the two of them. A strong, perverse madman. Zuaimo already expected that his future was a patch of darkness. This guy didn't have goodwill from the very start. From the Black Sea in the beginning, to the sword energy, and his spirit being wounded, then to embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Step by step, he became the lamb being led to slaughter. The pitiful him. He had though that there was only a bad-tempered neighbor living in there. He didn't think it was a wicked Yaoma. If he was only suspicious before, now he was 100% sure that Pu was Yaoma. Other than Yaoma, who would be so evil? Slowly waking up, like the chaos before creation, Zuaimo opened his eyes and lightly breathed out that breath of air that had been circulating inside his body all this time. This breath was long and continuous. When it was being exhaled, it was as concise as an arrow. Zuaimo felt slightly reassured. This embryonic breathing spirit cultivation was a miracle. The pain in his spirit had lessened greatly, and he could clearly feel his spirit stabilizing. When Pu Yao had just flicked his finger last night, his consciousness had almost been completely scattered. He didn't know where embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation came from. The words were cryptic and hard to understand. The syntax it used was the opposite of the jade stick that Zuaimo had brought. He had used a lot of energy before he barely managed to understand the first chapter. He didn't think to go ask Pu Yao. The lessons in tears and blood told him to try to take advantage of that guy. Just wait to get tricked. The first chapter was called Chapter of Spiritual Concentration. It talked about how to meditate and condense the spirit, stabilizing the consciousness. This was exactly what Zuaimo needed at the moment. After continuous injury, his consciousness was almost in shreds. If he couldn't fix it soon, it was probably that he could enter madness. As to the one breath Pu Yao mentioned, it meant being able to complete a whole embryonic breath. Embryonic breath was the core of embryonic breath spiritual cultivation, and it was the most basic cultivation method. It was also a kind of breathing that Zuaimo hadn't even heard of. Supposedly, it originated in the breathing of humans when they were embryos. They didn't need to use mouth and nose to breath, but required to use the entire body as opening. Take the air as thin strands and suck it in bit by bit before spreading it throughout the body. Hundreds of these tiny streams of air would circulate through the body, merge and then exhaled through the nose and mouth. The holes and points on the body were like the stars in a galaxy. They couldn't be measured. The nose and mouth were the biggest, the points on the body were second. The most abundant were those small, unable to be seen tiny holes that spread around the body. Zuaimo was very curious how the elder that had created this scripture had thought of such an outlandish method. Like goes with like. The scripture that Pu Yao, that crazy abnormal madman, threw out. It was just as abnormal as him. He still couldn't find a way to finish a whole embryonic breath. Pu Yao's words weren't empty threats. It was clearly written in the embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The last few days, he was really still using his nose and mouth to breath. No matter what, his first priority was stabilizing his spirit. If his spirit was unstable, just the occasional pain was enough to take Zuaimo's little life. But when Zuaimo's consciousness managed to slightly stabilize, he would have to face a question. The question of completing a whole embryonic breath. One breath. It was the trademark of the introduction to embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The deadline of 3 months was like a cloud over his head. When he thought about the light of insanity in Pu Yao's eyes when he talked about torture, Zuaimo was certain if he really couldn't achieve one breath in the 3 months, and was facing a reversal of blood flow, Pu Yao would be watching in interest from the side at his painful state. Such a tragic life. Zuaimo gritted his teeth and cursed the Renyao inside, the fires of anger burning. Suddenly, News from the sound tablet beside him aroused his attention. Continuing after the increase in price of the Ling grains last month, this month's Ling grains price once again increases. The demand for high-grade Ling grains has greatly increased, pulling along the price of low-grade Ling grains to also increase. He shook. The price of Ling grains were rising. This was undoubtedly the best news he heard in the last few days. Pu Yao suddenly came out. Such an interesting thing. Zuomo started with wide eyes. A long pause later, he finally managed to react, pointing at Pu Yao incoherently asking, You ran out? Pu Yao blinked his dark red right eye. Why can't I come out? Don't you have to stay in the consciousness? Zuomo asked dumbly. Who told you that? Pu Yao turned to him, face baffled, as he asked in return. Zuomo was speechless. Inside he couldn't help but wail. It seemed that he didn't even have the last bit of bargaining power. So the other could really move out. Pu Yao listened for a while and yawned. Oh, looks like a war is starting. War? Zuomo didn't understand. Pu Yao didn't explain. He swept the sound tablet into his grasp, and faintly stated, This thing is mine now. Before the voice landed, he disappeared with the sound tablet. Damned Renyao! Zuomo's furious shout echoed an empty yard. At this time, he suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. Zuomo was curious inside. Who could it be? Usually, no one would run to his place here. Running over and opening the door, Xiaogua pitifully stood outside. She was holding a clay pot in her hands. Seeing Zuomo, her body instantly shrunk back and timidly greeted, Xixiang. What's the problem now? Zuomo rarely had a good mood for this little bit of trouble. For some reason, whenever he saw the timidity on Xiaogua's face, he could never control his tone of voice. No. Xiaogua shook her head like a rattledrum, hurriedly explaining. Xiaogua has come to give something to Xixiang. Last time when Xixiang helped Xiaogua, Xiaogua hadn't thanked Xixiang. As she spoke, her little mouth twisted, and the mist in her eyes rose. With tears in her voice she muttered, Xiaogua doesn't have Jingshi. Seeing the direction wasn't right, Zuomo hurriedly shouted, Stop! Xiaogua was frightened to shrink back even more, but her crying instantly disappeared. She carefully put the clay pot in front of Zuomo, and like a rabbit, she jumped back. She timidly looked at Zuomo and gathered her courage to say, This is some soup Xiaogua made, Xixiang. Xixiang, just take a sip. You just have to take one sit. Before she could finish speaking, she descended into incoherency, her face so red due to anxiety it almost bled. She couldn't control it, and covered her face as she turned and ran. After running a few dozen steps, she suddenly stopped. Hesitating, she turned and yelled, Xixiang, if it really doesn't taste good you should throw it out. Zuomo watched as Xiaogua disappeared, and then at the clay pot in front of his feet. He bent down and lifted it. The soup was still warm. Raising the clay pot, he took a mouthful. The soup was thick and fragrant. The taste isn't bad, Zuomo said to himself. He drained it to the bottom and turned, holding the empty pot, to go back to his room. Pu Yao suddenly emerged, the crimson snake-like tongue unable to resist licking the lips, his two eyes gazing in the direction Xiaogua disappeared in. Such a tender little girl. Zuomo stared in shock at him. Pu Yao turned around his peerlessly handsome face. At this time, he seemed like a gluttonous cat, the light flashing in his deep red eye. Such good lucky. This little girl's meat definitely would be very tender and delicious. Zuomo suddenly erupted, raising his hand to viciously throw the empty pot in his right hand at Pu Yao. Bang! The pot cracked, the pieces scattering. Get lost! The thousand-winged ship stopped in midair. Li Xian looked at the green moon star outside the window, her fine brows furrowed. It seems that the little Yao ran away. Uncle Qi, has there been a reply from the sect? Qi Jinren shook his head. Miss, there are thousands of Yaoma suppressed under the Yao smelting tower. And it was a long time ago. There's nothing to research. Most of them came from the great battle 3,000 years ago, captured by our sect's supreme power. Most of these Yaoma are ones of great power, difficult to kill, so they were suppressed under the Yao smelting power, to be slowly destroyed. I've never thought that these Yaoma were this tenacious. After 3,000 years, yet there were still survivors. Lycian air revealed a reminiscing expression. 3,000 years ago, our sect was so strong. Qi Yizhenren sighed as well. Not just our sect. 3,000 years ago, each sect in the cultivation world were far more powerful than now. The 10,000-strong alliance of the Yaoma were completely eradicated by the elders. And it was that battle that the Xiuzha established today's status. And then he gave an expression full of pity. However, even though the Yaoma were almost completely captured, but the Xiuzha were also greatly wounded. Only 1 in 10 of the great powers remained. Many sects fell in that great war. Countless scriptures were lost. 3,000 years, and the Xiuzha still cannot recover to the prosperity of the past. However, compared to us, the blow the Yaoma suffered were even greater. These years, have you seen them ever break through the bloody sky metropolis Jia? Lycian air listened entranced. Even though it was history she already knew, but hearing it each time, it still captured her mind. Grandpa is calling me back. She pouted her little mouth, face full of unwillingness. It was so hard getting a chance to come out. And this was so short, and he's urging me back. We didn't even catch the little Yao yet. If we return, it should wait after I catch the little Yao. Qi Yizhenren looked at the innocence on her face, and a hint of indulgence flashed across his face. But he still urged. Miss, the sect leader urging Miss to go back. It's probably due to another matter. What matter could there be? She lightly snorted. Probably just another genius of some sect that has come. Grandpa is really obsessed with those sword shio lately. I really hate the sword shio. Each of them arrogant and disrespectful. Qi Yizhenren smiled, replying. These days didn't Miss play very happily with a sword shio? You mean that funny idiot, who said he's a sword shio? Lycian air refuted. Tianyu Jie is the territory of sword shio. Here out of 10 people, 9 are sword shio. Maybe he's just that one. Lycian air objected. She suddenly revealed a distressed expression. Returning, I won't have a way to use the little 1,000 cranes. It was so hard to find an interesting person, but I can't play anymore. Seeing the vexation on her face, Qi Yizhenren couldn't bear it. If Miss likes it, why don't I make a transportation formation at Tianyu Jie and get a disciple to guard it? Miss 1,000 Guide Crane can come through the transportation formation. Once it gets over, the 1,000 Guide Crane can automatically find him. Lycian air was happy. Uncle Qi Yi is the best. Haha, he probably still assumes that Xian air's paper crane is the normal little 1,000 cranes. Qi Yizhenren's heart was comforted, and he smiled, complimenting. The 1,000 Guide Crane that Miss invented, even the elders in the sect praise it. Lycian air proudly pouted. Of course. Chapter 19 Shixiang Weisheng the breeze blew coolly. Again and again, Zuoyamo practiced the finger movements. The fingers moved faster and fast, but suddenly with a crisp sound, the fingers paused and turned into a mess. This was already the 7th time. Practicing finger motions today, he wasn't successful once. Exhaling a long breath, he suppressed the fretfulness in his heart. The finger motions of the art of flora were complicated. If his mind wasn't calm, it was easy to make mistakes. But how could Zuoyamo calm down his mind? 2 months have passed, but he still couldn't complete one embryonic breath. That wasn't what made him most discouraged, was that he was unable to find the door. Before, no matter if he was studying Little Art of Cloud and Rain, or the other 4 spells in the jade stick that he had brought, even if he temporarily could understand, but at the very least, he knew in which direction to work in. But after he fixed his consciousness using embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he couldn't find the direction. He wanted to spend more time, however, the amount of time spent practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation couldn't be over 4 hours. The ball of light hadn't explicitly stated why it couldn't surpass 4 hours, but Zuoyamo was suspicious it could cause harm, so he didn't dare to experiment. According to the directions in the ball, he only needed to stop breathing with the nose and mouth before he would be able to turn to embryonic breathing. But not matter how he closed his breathing, the instinct for living always made him unconsciously open his mouth. He couldn't even find the feeling of the embryonic breathing. In the following 2 months, other than his consciousness recovering to full health, he hadn't made any new breakthroughs. In the rest of the time, he could only practice other spells. What was unexpected to him were that the great speeds his Ling energy and spell work improved, especially his spell work, other than Little Art of Cloud and Rain and Art of Aged Gold. In just 2 short months, he managed to elevate the remaining 3 spells to the 2nd level. This kind of speed, even he found it unimaginable. Other than joy, his heart was also worried. Embryonic breathing spirit cultivation hadn't improved at all. There was only 1 month left until the 3-month deadline. Whether a reversal of blood flow was as horrifying as Pu Yao said, he wasn't clear. But any of the feelings he got from the 4 words were not good ones. He tried to ask for aid from Pu Yao, but Pu Yao's sneer instantly provoked him. For some unknown reason, he was easily enraged in front of Pu Yao. The Ling grains had a bountiful harvest. Compared to the other Shixiang, the output of his Ling grains were clearly higher. In the disaster last time, even though his Ling grains were affected, but the situation had been much better than Old Black and the others. After that, he basically didn't try to conceal it. Art of Flora, Art of Earth Energy, Art of Aged Gold were all used. Only Art of Crimson Flame, due to the fact that it was opposite the Yin attribute of the Ling grains, was not used. Adding on the 5 mu of Ling fields in the yard, the overall output far surpassed his estimates. Taking out the rent for the sect, he kept a portion of the Ling grains for his own use, before selling all of the rest. His income was 62 pieces of 2nd-grade Jingshi. Adding on the 15 pieces of 2nd-grade Jingshi from last time from Li Yingfeng, his total assets now totaled 77 pieces of 2nd-grade Jingshi. The reason that he had profited so much was that the price of Ling grains were increasing. Even Old Black, so seriously affected by the calamity, had enough to pay the sect's rent. It could be seen just how much the price of Ling grains had grown on the market. And the other thing that made Zuemo worried was how Min Shiji and Luo Li Shixiang. Up until now, those 2 still hadn't returned to the sect. In the past few days, he had found that some of the Ling herbs in the medicine fields of Cold Mist Valley were showing hints of illness. Taking care of Ling herbs was an extremely meticulous job. Much more care was needed than taking care of Ling grains. His own little Art of Cloud and Rain could only guarantee their water intake. From the perspective of the plant, this was just its most basic requirement. In the short term, nothing could be seen, but as time passed, it was easy for problems to occur. At present he was hard-pressed. His purse had become the fullest it had ever been, yet he didn't have any joy. The damned, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, the horrid Haomen Shiji and Luo Li Shixiang, and the twice accursed Pu Yao. Why was it that Ji has such a kind heart, yet have to face such evil? He wanted to cry. In the previous few days, other than embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he spent all of the other time on Art of Aged Gold. In the 5 arts that a Ling plant farmer required, at least 3 had to reach the 3rd level. Zuomo's little Art of Cloud and Rain had already reached the 4th level. And in the 4 remaining arts, the one most likely to reach the 3rd level was Art of Aged Gold. Today he didn't have the mood to practice Art of Aged Gold. He widened his eyes, frantically running over every word in embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation in his head. If his face could have expressions, then right now it would be twisted into a ball. 1 month. Only 1 month left. Biting the corner of his lip, he carefully thought over every word. Pu Yao was still sneering. This completely aroused the stubbornness in Zuomo's bones. The damned bastard. By now, he finally understood why he was easily provoked in front of Pu Yao. Pu Yao could easily tear away a person's disguise. He would explicitly or implicitly guide the other's emotions and expose the other's most basic personality. And once he knew that, to someone of such cunning like Pu Yao, swearing wouldn't really provoke him. Zuomo didn't try to restrain his own emotions anymore. If he couldn't vent, he felt that he would, under the damned Renyao's attacks, die. As to suffering a little, he didn't care. Even if he was obedient, would Pu Yao be kind to him? That would be clear even if one used a toe to think. It was better to get some back verbally, and he would feel better. Gu is a little stalk of grass. No matter how you blow, you can't blow me down. Thud thud thud. A series of urgent knocks sounded. Little MOG. It It was Old Black. Why did he come? Zuo controlled his fretful heart and stood to open the door. Opening the door as expected, it was Old Black's wind-blown face, but there was an unfamiliar male standing beside him. Seeing Zuo, Old Black released a breath. Oh good, you're here. Finishing, he introduced the male beside him. This is Wei Sheng Xixiang. Wei Sheng. Zuo was slightly shocked. This male stranger in front of him was the head of the outer sect disciples, Wei Sheng. He couldn't help staring in examination. Not very tall, thick and broad shoulders, square face, thick brows. He looked extremely honest, but the flickers of light that occasionally came from the pair of eyes made one unable to underestimate him. Wei Sheng Xixiang. Zuo made a greeting. Wei Sheng Xixiang rarely showed his face outside, but his reputation within the outer sect disciples was extremely high. To have good relationships with this kind of person, there were only benefits and no drawbacks. Wei Sheng scrutinized Zuo for a few seconds and returned the greeting, smiling warmly and responding. Zuo shitty is really hidden deep. Zuo was slightly shocked, but he wasn't too surprised. Wei Sheng Xixiang's cultivation was higher than him. His mouth was humble. Xixiang over compliments. Come, let's come in to talk. The three walked into the yard. Wei Sheng gazed at the surroundings and praised. Such a big yard. And Old Black's two eyes were rooted to the ling fields in the yard. A beat later he said vexed. Why didn't I think of this way? Isn't this exempt from the rent? Zuo smiled saying, I'm just taking advantage. I don't know which Xixiang built this yard and put in 5 mu of ling fields. But it was a pity that it was barren for too long. The grade dropped 1 grade ling fields. At least it's better than nothing. Old Black gave a sorrowful expression. Such a pity to waste the good ling fields. Zuo didn't speak. He didn't know if it was that Old Black had farmed for too long, but towards ling fields, Old Black had an unique affection. Even the yard is all ling fields. Zuo shitty really lives up to being a farming madman. It seems that I found the right person this time. Wei Sheng added. The three sat down under the old tree. Zuo quickly boiled a pot of tea. His art of crimson flame was only on the first level, and he could only form a small ball of fire, which wasn't very useful. But it was convenient to use to lit fires. Xixiang was looking for me? Zuo didn't decline and headed straight for the main topic. Have you encountered something? Sure, she might be limited in cultivation, but if I can add in an effort, I will certainly do so. Wei Sheng didn't stand on courtesy. Coming this time, it really is to trouble shitty with something. He carefully took out from his bosom a jade box. Opening the jade box, a flow of extremely thick ling energy wafted out. A stalk of ling herb inside. This ling herb was about 30 centimeters long, leaves fire red, a black line running through. Contrasting against the red leaves was a completely green fruit. If the muscles on his face weren't paralyzed, Zuo's expression would have been very rich. The ling plant that he couldn't name was shockingly thick with ling energy. He cautiously took it up, putting it in front of his eyes for examination. The ling plant seemed to have been carved out of a piece of red fire jade, translucent and glowing. Definitely 3rd grade and above. In this segment of time, as he helped Haomin Shiji take care of the medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley, his knowledge in the subject of ling herbs broadened greatly. He might not be able to call out its name, but from the appearance and the ling energy it emitted, it was better than most of the ling herbs in Cold Mist Valley. This fire dragon grass, its grade is a rare 3rd grade, and was very hard to find. Wei Sheng's expression was solemn. There is still a length of time before I reach Juji. In this time, I ask for Shitty to help take care of this fire dragon grass for me. Take care? Zuo was surprised. His response was extremely quick. Is Xixiang using this fire dragon grass to Juji? If Wei Sheng didn't say this was fire dragon grass, Zuo probably wouldn't have recognized it. Was it because it was 3rd grade? This fire dragon grass was very different from the one in Zuo's memory. Yes. Wei Sheng nodded, his face calm. At the side, Zuo and Old Black couldn't help but give an admiring look. There were many ling herbs that were required for Juji, but only a few of the primary herbs were the crucial ones. Fire dragon grass was one of them, but not the best choice because it needed to be consumed raw, and its effects were violent. Someone without great willpower might not be able to endure the violent nature and cause the Ling energy of the body to dissipate. These years, there were very few that would use it to finish Shuji. However, even though fire dragon grass was akin to a poison, but if one overcame it, it was extremely beneficial to the cultivation. The effect was much better than normal Ling herbs, but third-grade fire dragon grass. Think how violent the effects would be. In just a few words, Zuemo felt respect form for this Xixiang that he just met for the first time. He had heard some of the rumors about Wei Sheng Xixiang. Supposedly, Xixiang had been orphaned from young. After he was taken into the sect, he was entranced with cultivating the sword. In order to learn a better sword art, he didn't even hesitate about going to Luoli Xixiang's place to be a sword servant. Meeting him today, Zuemo found that Wei Sheng Xixiang lived up to the rumors. Chapter 20 Obsession. He lowered his head to think for a moment before raising his head. Shidi admires Xixiang's bravery. But the Ling herb is third grade. If it cannot be planted in third grade or above Ling fields, the Ling energy would likely dissipate, and the grade will drop. Wei Sheng's expression changed but recovered. He smiled, responding, "If that's the case, it will mean I won't have to suffer the pain." Compared to the calmness on Wei Sheng's face, there was heavy worry on Old Black's face. His heart considering for a second, Zuemo quickly organized his words. Little brother might have a solution to try. "Oh Shidi, please tell." Wei Sheng's mood roused. "I have been requested by Haomin Shiji to take care of the medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley. I saw that many of the fields in the valley are empty. We could plant it in the valley. I'm just worried if Haomin Shiji returns before Xixiang enters Juji, something will happen." Wei Sheng's expression became joyful. Shidi doesn't have to worry. Haomin Shiji and Luoli Xixiang wouldn't come back so quickly. Zuemo finally remembered that Wei Sheng Xixiang was Luoli Xixiang's sword servant. He probably knew where the two people had gone. He was naturally willing to be able to help Wei Sheng Xixiang. But thinking about the fact that Haomin Shiji wouldn't be returning soon, his mood instantly darkened. He was extremely careful every day, fearful that something would go wrong in the medicine fields. It was like a hot potato. Sorting out his emotions, Zuemo smiled, declaring, "Then it's good. I will first congratulate Xixiang for successfully Juji." Wei Sheng waved his hand. "It's too early to say those things." Finishing, he took out a jade stick, handing it to Zuemo. "Xixiang doesn't have many possession, and nothing to give out. This is some of the experiences that Xixiang had these years. Hopefully they would help Shidi." Zuemo was overcome with joy. He had always been along in learning with no one to discuss with. Wei Sheng Xixiang's cultivation was only just higher than him, but his experiences and realizations were just what he needed and could use. He wasn't courteous and gleefully took it. "Many thanks, Xixiang." After the three chatted for a while, Wei Sheng and Old Black stood and made their farewells. After the two left, Zuemo hurriedly took the fire dragon grass to Cold Mist Valley. The medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley were third grade, and Zuemo had been drooling after them. He didn't know much about Ling herbs, but he knew what the price of third-grade Ling grains were. Finding a patch of empty ground, he carefully planted the fire dragon grass. And then he cast Little Art of Cloud and Rain. The effect of the fourth level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain was extremely evident. The fire dragon grass quickly recovered its vitality, the leaves becoming even shiner. Greedily inhaling the thick Ling energy in the air, Zuemo exclaimed inside. Third grade was really third grade. He made another circle around the medicine fields. Finding no problems, he left. When he returned home, the sky was already dark. Sitting on the rooftop, Zuemo suddenly thought if he couldn't complete one breath in the 1 month of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, then wouldn't he be hampering Wei Sheng Xixiang's Juji? But then he turned it around. If he wasn't successful, he wouldn't even have a life left. How could he care about that? Thinking about Wei Sheng Xixiang, he automatically took out the jade stick that Xixiang gave to him and sent Ling energy into the jade stick. Very quickly he was entranced. The jade stick described in fine details the realizations and experiences of Wei Sheng's entire cultivation journey. It was extremely scattered in many places. It could be seen that it was only Xixiang would just casually record down whatever he thought. The rumor that Xixiang was infatuated with the sword wasn't false. The writings in the jade stick were scattered all over, not a system to be found, but the great majority were about sword xiao. After reading for a while, Zuomo's heart started to jump uncontrollably. Those of sword enter the grounds of death, find life in death, like a wounded soldier, hold the resolution of death, attack with full power, nothing is undefeatable. Traveling night, encounter over 20 blood duck bats, hard battle, injured 21 places, all slaughtered. Streamside met iron ape, skin like steel, hard to wound with blade, tempted enemy 200 so miles, wounded eye, no strength to chase. These phrases were all extremely short, yet the vicious and resolute aura came through the words. Life and death. They were the characters that appeared the most. The Wei Sheng Xixiang in the jade stick, and the person he saw today were like two people. What made the biggest impression on Zuomo, and gave him the most shock were these few segments. Walked 100 days, finally saw 9 rivers falling over sky, gazed from bottom, galloping and rolling, like the godly thunder of heaven. Weight like 30,000 caddies, vast and unending, cannot be resisted. My heart follows, if aura of sword can be so, no regrets in death. Sat and gazed 3 months, thought day and night, but due to dumbness cannot find the meaning. Stood on top of waterfall 7 days, not sleeping, not drinking or eating, suddenly comprehended. Fish jump following the water and down, moving among, forgetting life and death, consciousness clear, and finally found flavor. Broken bones 13, bedridden half year, lost hearing and sight, so practiced in heart. Zuomo fell into a daze muttering. Insane! Such insanity, such obsession. It wasn't anything he had ever thought of. Under the stars he sat on the roof, hand holding the jade stick as his thoughts wandered. In his own world, there wasn't anything that made him so crazy, so obsessed. He had great talent in the field of the 5 elements. He easily learned any kind of spells. He didn't have high expectations for life. He put effort into learning and comprehending the 5 elements spell. It was only so that he could live a better life. The obsession that Wei Sheng Xixiang had towards the sword, it gave him an unparalleled blow to his spirit. He could see the sweat and fresh blood behind each character. Something inside his body seemed to be turning and vibrating, making him feel uncomfortable. A long time later, his emotions gradually calmed down, but he didn't have any desire for sleep. Under the night sky, he just started to learn the sword motions, according to the sword scripture in the jade stick. There was a set of sword scriptures recorded in the jade stick. It was moves Wei Sheng Xixiang had picked out of the sword scriptures he practiced and read every day. Wei Sheng Xixiang had rich battle experience, and these sword moves were extremely useful. There were not beautiful techniques, it was extremely simple to start with. It was a pity he didn't have a flying sword. After motioning for a while, he could only sit down. Once he sat down, he started to muse about embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation again. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was cryptic, but now he wasn't discouraged at all, only ashamed. The obsession of Wei Sheng Xixiang deeply provoked him. Compared to Wei Sheng Xixiang, what were the little difficulties that he ran into? Alright, if he wanted to see Ji's humiliation, Puyao, wait for the next life. Deeply inhaling a breath, he started to once again investigate this embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation that he couldn't wrap his head around. The days passed one by one. Other than going once a day to Cold Mist Valley, he didn't take a step out any other time. In the sea of consciousness, Puyao sat on the gravestone and leisurely listened to the sound tablet. Zuomo gritted his teeth, but still went forward, fawningly asking, Pu, what is really the main point of the first step of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation? I'm stupid, can't you show a little bit? The first step. Very simple, there's no main point. Puyao didn't even raise his eyelids, still listening to the sound tablet. Looking at the sound tablet that Puyao held on his leg, Zuomo thought that since asking didn't work, then it had to be enticement. He asked, Pu, this sound tablet isn't bad, right? Pretty interesting. Puyao inattentively responded, do you want a better one? Zuomo's voice was like that of a strange uncle, that was holding a lollipop to fool little girls. For the first time, Pu Yao opened his right eye, the deep red pupils expressing interest. Want? Zhuo shook his head. If you help me explain embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, I'll buy a better one. I can buy it myself. Pu Yao said carelessly. He closed his eyes again, listening to the sound tablet. Zhuo stared with an open mouth. You have Jingshi? No. Pu Yao's eyes were still closed. With a face full of enjoyment, following the music that the sound tablet broadcasted, his body strangely swayed. Zhuo released a breath, his tone smug again. If there's no Jingshi, you can't buy anything. He suddenly realized, with Pu Yao's strength, if he tried to snatch one, that wasn't impossible. Or he could steal one, he definitely wouldn't leave a trace. You have Jingshi. Pu Yao moved his body following the beat of the music. Then you have to explain. Zhuo's heart was comforted, and he continued to emphasize the relationship between Jingshi and the sound tablet. Inside, he muttered. Thankfully, he hadn't thought to just use brute force. Pu impatiently interrupted Zhuo, holding out his right hand. He showed a handful of Jingshi. I can take it myself. Zhuo was dumbstruck, staring at the Jingshi on Pu Yao's hands. So familiar. After a silent moment, he suddenly gave a sky-shaking bellow like a beast in desperate straits. Damned Renyao! You dare to move Ye's Jingshi, you will kill. Beside the pond in Cold Mist Valley, Zhuo gazed at the pond water scared. The pond water was cold to the bone. He had touched it with his hand. Even now the palm was still stiff. There was only 3 days left until the last deadline. He still hadn't made it past the gate of the first breath. Pu Yao still didn't seem to care. Zhuo understood. This guy really didn't care about his life and death. But in these many days, it wasn't he hadn't made any progress. He thought of a method. Right now, he was thinking of trying to find out if this method was right or not. But the rushing waterfall couldn't stop the coldness of the pond water from spreading. Just from beside the pond, he still could feel the oppressive coldness. He nervously licked his lips. He didn't want to try this method. But seeing that there were only 3 days left, he had no other choice. He hesitated for a moment, hardened his heart, closed his eyes, and jumped into the pool. The bone-aching iciness of the pond water seemed to freeze his entire body into an ice cube in an instant. He couldn't help shudder. He was like a rock continuously sinking. The pond water flowed up his mouth and nose. The outside world seemed to have been blocked off, so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. After the initial panic, Zhuo quickly calmed down. He then followed embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation to move his breath. He didn't know if it was the stimulation from the cold pond water, but he was abnormally alert. The movement of the breath was abnormally smooth. After 10 minutes, when his breath was almost consumed, the feeling of suffocation became even stronger. Zhuo raised his awareness. He knew the most crucial time had arrived. Before every time, it was at this step that he would unconsciously open his mouth to breathe. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation didn't have much elaboration on this step, as though in the eyes of the Xiuzhe that created this scripture, this was the simplest thing. Chapter 21 One breath. He didn't know if embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was correct, even if he didn't want to admit it. But with Pu Yao's cunning, if he wanted this little life, he only had to curl his fingers. There wasn't a need to use a half-accurate scripture to fool him. But with Pu Yao's perverseness and strange sense of humor, finding ways of torturing him, that was almost certainly the case. However, Pu Yao was usually very quiet. Other than forcing Zhuo to cultivate embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he didn't make any other moves. There wasn't any hint of tormenting. Zhuo couldn't understand Pu Yao, and didn't know what was Pu Yao's true aims. Pu Yao definitely had a goal. Sometimes this thought was extremely clear and certain in his mind. However, when he tried to think about it, he found it was as though he was facing a vast and deep ocean. You never knew what was really hidden at the bottom. Maybe Pu was really trying to help him. Zhuo knew just how difficult it was to heal wounds of the spirit. If it wasn't embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, it would still be a question of whether he would be breathing right now. Blaming Pu Yao, it seemed unreasonable. It could only say that Pooh's strangeness and sense of perversion made him instinctively afraid. The most tragic thing was that no matter which kind it was, he had no space to rebel. No matter if this embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was true or not. No matter what aims Pooh had, he had no room to rebel. In front of the kind of great existence that was Pooh, he was pitifully weak. The only thing he could do was force himself to charge forward in hopes of finding that glimmer of light. If it was really just tormenting, as one already in the situation, he would sink in Pooh's torment or make it through. Damn it! How did he provoke such a calamity? Time passed drop by drop. Accompanying the strong feeling of suffocation was terror that uncontrollably rose. His awareness started to fade. He was completely unaware of the face his legs were instinctively moving, trying to rise out of the water. But he had been sinking the whole time, and it was now too far from the surface. Was he going to die? Even this thought was incomplete. He was paralyzed, weak as he swam in the limitless ocean. No, I can't die. He tried to struggle, tried to wake his own awareness. But all of it was useless. Under the feeling of suffocation, his awareness slowly dissipated, became muddled. Was he really going to die? In a stupor, he seemed to hear someone was yelling, "Don't forget. Even in death, you must not forget." For some reason, those two phrases that he considered nightmares seemed to be like a large hand that suddenly pulled him back from unconsciousness. I can't die. Zuomo used up the last remaining strength in his body, furiously shouting soundlessly inside. His body shook violently like a sieve, the blood vessels under his skin quickly expanding, visible to the naked eye, raven black and thick, twisting and turning like earthworms, covering the entire body, unspeakably terrifying. That breath at the chest that had become extremely weak turned into a candle flame, a flame that could be easily extinguished. Yet this weak feeble candle flame became a prairie fire, lighting up the sea of consciousness, like lighting up firewood that was bone dry and then soaked in oil. Dark red flames, spitting and roaring, followed the ground in the sea of consciousness, rolling forwards. The grasses and woods instantly turned to dust. Nothing could stop it. In the blink of an eye, the consciousness became a burning hell. Endless dark red flames flickering in every corner of the sea of consciousness. The bright and hot red fire recklessly danced. On the strange black gravestone shrouded in black smoke, there sat a handsome male with a strange cold face. No one was able to forget his beautiful and enticing features. The sound tablet was on his knee. The concentrated sounds of the zither were like a hurricane that made people unable to breathe. The red sea of fire burned soundlessly. Under the hair that blocked half his face, Pooh's thin blade-like lips imperceptibly rose on one side. Just as usual, enchanting yet cold. Zuomo curiously examined the surroundings. After achieving one breath, his perception of the surroundings changed dramatically. It was hard to explicitly describe. It was as though the surroundings had been cleaned, changed beyond recognition. This feeling was extremely unique. It took a long time for him to get used to it. The other change was his sea of consciousness. Right now, it had turned into a sea of fire. A sea of fire that might extinguish sometime. Other than that, he didn't have any new discoveries. As to whether embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation had any good attributes, he didn't have any high hopes. He was just a guy that wanted to be a ling plant farmer. What did he need such a strong consciousness for? If he could pass this obstacle, keep his little life, he was content. The game was too dangerous. Go won't play. Thinking about the danger yesterday, there were still lingering fears. However, the sharp sword hanging over his head finally disappeared. He could finally release a breath. He resolutely decided that no matter what Pooh gave him next time, he wouldn't take it if it meant his heath. The painful experiences gave him a hard lesson. To steal benefits from Pooh's hands, that was an action leading to death. Zuomo found his own little life very precious. Pooh didn't seem to care if he was practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Every day, he guarded his new sound tablet, endlessly amused. Every time he saw the brand new sound tablet that was higher in quality than the one in his hands, he would feel pain. 10 pieces of second-grade tincture was wasted. His teeth hurt. His heart sour. He could only hold in the tears as he took the sound tablet that Pu Yao was preparing to throw away. That was his old sound tablet that Pu Yao had taken from his hands. Enamored with the new, bored with the old. This was another bad habit that he found on Pu Yao's body. But coming back to it, did Pu Yao have any good habits? Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was like a small detour in his life, and Pu Yao seemed to have put away his perverseness, silent as a virgin. It made Zuoyamo feel unaccustomed, but malicious curses like, Ren Yao is just Ren Yao. Do you think if you don't speak, you can turn into a woman? Naturally weren't avoidable. What made him happy was that he sped through the 5 elements spells. He didn't know if it was because he completed the one breath. Many of the fuzzy part previously were abnormally clear now, easily realized. He became even more motivated. He didn't have any interest in something as strange as embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The kind of things like Art of Aged Gold, which could get him real things like Jingshur, and spells were his true love. He was like a monk, living an extremely dull life each day, cultivating 10 principles scripture, accumulating Ling energy again and again, practicing all kind of spells finger motions. Just like when he had practiced little art of cloud and rain, he furiously cultivated. The one that had the most improvement was Art of Aged Gold. Presently, the aged gold energy was dark gold, the light subdued, changing according to his wishes. And compared to before, there was now an addition of a hint of imposingness. Even though it was extremely faint, but in actual use, the effects multiplied and made Zuoyamo gleeful. It wasn't strange that Art of Aged Gold improved, since the most important aspect of Art of Aged Gold was consciousness. Even though he had just finished one breath in embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, but compared to before, his consciousness was much stronger. So it was expected that Art of Aged Gold would improve. What made him surprised was that Art of Earth Energy also improved much. The crucial factor in Art of Earth Energy was communication and perception. Did his consciousness help with communication and perception? He didn't know, but since it was a good thing, he went with the flow and didn't examine it deeper. Zuoyamo was in the yard as he practiced Art of Aged Gold, when suddenly a calm and authoritative voice echoed through Wukong Mountain. Outer sect disciple Li Yingfeng continuously practiced and broke through to Zhuji. From today, she is formally taken into this sect's inner disciples. Outer sect disciples should take this as an example, cultivate relentlessly in order to reach the right result. This voice wasn't loud but clear. It rippled through Wukong Mountain and reverberated endlessly. Li Yingfeng managed to successfully Zhuji. Zuoyamo couldn't help but admire and feel happy for Li Yingfeng Shiji. He hadn't interacted for a long time with Li Yingfeng Shiji. The two of them even had a misunderstanding, but he admired this brisk and clever Shiji. This was the role model a Shiji should be. In comparison, Haomin Shiji was greatly lacking. His life wasn't affected by the news. His interest in Zhuji was much smaller than to become a Ling plant farmer. Zhuji was the first great step to cultivation, but other than achieving Jindan, there wasn't much of a difference in lifespan compared to a normal person. As to Jindan, don't even think about it. Not just an outer sect disciple like him. Even among those inner SEC disciples, how many would achieve Jindan? And if he became a Ling plant farmer, that was true and real Jingshur. He continued to bury himself in practicing his spells. To something he decided on, he never was remiss. Just like practicing little art of cloud and rain. Without anyone to teach him, he cast it again and again. He didn't know how many thousands of times he cast it, but he managed to fill up the large pond in the yard using little art of cloud and rain. Just like that, he managed to achieve the 3rd level of little art of cloud and rain. His cultivation was interrupted by an uninvited guest. The one who came was the one who just became an inner sect disciple, Li Yingfeng Shiji. Congratulations, Shiji, for successfully Zhuji. Zuoyamo smiled as he congratulated, but his expressionless features made it weird. Shiji is too polite. Li Yingfeng's face was full of joy as she responded. It won't be long before I would probably hear Shiji's good news. In Li Yingfeng's heart, this Shiji that kept himself concealed in the dark, it wouldn't be unexpected to her if he completed Zhuji. Behind her, there were 3 other female disciples, Xiaoguo among them. Zuoyamo hurriedly said. It's still early, still early. Shiji, please. Xiaoguo's adorable and tender apple face was still timid. Zuoyamo suddenly felt this little girl was really bashful. Taking advantage of when Li Yingfeng turned, he blinked his eyes at Xiaoguo. As expected, Xiaoguo's face flushed red. After everyone was seated, Li Yingfeng declared her intentions. Coming this time, it's to ask for a favor from Shidi. Zuoyamo was surprised. Seeming to have detected Zuomo's puzzlement, before he could ask, Li Yingfeng herself answered the question, lightly sighing. Entering the inner sect, in the future, I'm afraid I won't have the time again to care for these sisters. Shidi's growing skills, no one in the sect can compete. Shiji can only come with a thick face to beg. Zuoyamo hurriedly deflected. Shiji, please tell. In the future, Li Yingfeng was an inner sect disciple. As long as Zuoyamo would still stay in Wukong's sect for one more day, he wouldn't offend them. Li Yingfeng took out a small bag, putting it on the stone table, informing. This is 20 pieces of second-grade jingsher. It's a little bit of regard from Shiji. Shidi, don't decline. Shidi, if you are free, spend some time at the Eastern Peak and attend a bit. Their lives aren't easy. If something like last time occurred, with Shidi's help, they wouldn't have no one to ask for aid. Beside her, Xiaoguo's mouth twisted, and the rims of her eyes instantly turned red. The other two also had red eyes. Zuoyamo sighed inside. Compared to Wei Xing Xixiang, the eldest Xixiang who only had cultivation, Li Yingfeng, as the eldest Shiji, was undoubtedly more competent. Only now did he understand why her reputation among the female disciples was so high. Thinking, Zuoyamo pushed the bag back in front of Li Yingfeng, declaring, helping each other, it is a part of friendship. Shiji, don't worry, Shidi will do his best. Xiaoguo stared with wide eyes at Zuoyamo. The other two females also had strange expressions on their faces. They couldn't understand why this money-grubbing zombie changed his personality this time. Li Yingfeng shook her head and pushed the jingsher again in front of Zuoyamo. Shidi, don't decline. The sect has provisions for the inner sect disciples each month. Shijie doesn't lack for jingsher. But Shidi, you aren't far from Zhuji, so you would most likely need it soon. Having some jingsher, it's just in case. The strange expression on the three females' faces turned to shock. Zhuji. This ill-tempered zombie Xixiang was going to Zhuji soon? To be called nearing Zhuji, at the very least, it had to be 8th level of Lianqi and above. They were frightened out of their wits by Shiji's words. A cultivation of Lianqi 8th level in the outer sect disciples could be counted on one hand. Even Guolu Xixiang was just at Lianqi 7th level. And among the female disciples of the outer sect, other than Li Yingfeng who just entered Zhuji, the highest person was just Lianqi 6th level. In the outer sect disciples other than Wei Sheng, Zuomo's cultivation was the highest. This zombie face, he was actually the second best in the outer sect disciples. This was something they would have never thought about. Originally planning to grant a boon to Shiji, Zuoyamo saw the situation and didn't stand on courtesy, and accepted the jingsher. Then many thanks, Shiji. It should be me that gives thanks to Shidi. Li Yingfeng smiled and informed. After I leave the Eastern Peak, Xiaoguo will be responsible for communicating with Shidi. Her personality is soft and obedient. Shidi, don't bully her. Zuoyamo couldn't help laugh. What is Shiji talking about? My temper is the best. That's good. Li Yingfeng nodded. On the side, Xiaoguo wrinkled her adorable nose, clearly disagreeing with the words. She turned to show a dark face and said to the three people. In the future, if you have any questions, find Zuoyamo Xixiang. He'll help you solve them. Zuoyamo Xixiang's words are my words. If someone doesn't listen, I will personally punish. Yes, Shiji. The three females replied. As expected from the eldest Shiji, just this bearing, no disciples in the younger generation could compete. Zuoyamo couldn't help but compliment inside after chatting for a while. Li Yingfeng left with the three other females. Zuoyamo suddenly didn't have any interest in cultivation. This was a society with strict classes. Like Li Yingfeng Shiji, after successfully Zhuji, she had to bid farewell to the life of an outer sect disciple. She had to aim for even higher goals. No matter if it was her own goal or the needs of the sect. The lifespan of a Jindan was about 300 years. Before that, Zhuji, Ningmai and Lianqi didn't have any differences in lifespan. His own sect was temporarily deficient in manpower, and had been for a long time. Including the leader of the sect, the Shirshu were all Jindan. This was the basic reason that Wukong sword sect had expanded so well these past years. However, even the youngest Shirshu, Shifeng Rong, was more than 200 years old. And among the disciples of the second generation, there wasn't even a Ningmai disciple, much less a Jingdan. If there wasn't a successor, Wukong sect, not a very big sect to begin with, would quickly decline. No matter which Jia, a sect, once it declined, it was harder to rise again than to reach the heavens. Why did he suddenly become so melancholic? Zuemo shook his head. Suddenly, he thought of the third-grade fire dragon grass that Wei Xing Shixiang gave into his care. Li Yingfeng Shiji had already entered Juji. Wei Xing Shixiang must be close as well. Thinking about it, the desire to go to Cold Mist Valley formed. Chapter 22 Silver-Horned Worm. It wasn't the first time he came to Cold Mist Valley. But he didn't know if it was the fact that his consciousness had improved, but the Jinji, that he could only just feel the pressure of last time, were now like a beast that revealed the tip of its horn. That heavy power was multiple times stronger, making him feel unable to breathe. Zuemo walked with a trembling heart and rushed through the thick mists. The suddenly open valley was drifting with the fragrance from the herbs. Zuemo unconsciously looked with trepidation at the roaring cold pond. Even though he successfully completed one breath, the feeling of oncoming death was in front of his eyes. He definitely didn't want to try again. He should be realistic and become a ling plant farmer, he told himself. Walking in front of the fire dragon grass, he was instantly shocked. The fire dragon grass was drooping, a hint of death coming from the red leaves. His heart instantly panicked. This fire dragon grass was intimately related to the big event of Wei Xing Shixiang entering Juji. If something went wrong, what would happen? He was extremely admiring of Wei Xing Shixiang, and truly hoped for Wei Xing Shixiang to successfully Juji. He hurriedly bent down to inspect this fire dragon grass. The soil in the surroundings was still moist. It wasn't a problem of underwatering. Then what was the problem? His knowledge of ling herbs was pitiful, not to mention for a third-grade fire dragon grass. He ran through his brain, furiously going through his experiences of growing plants in these 2 years, and at what time the symptoms were similar to what the fire dragon grass was experiencing now. Was it that there was a pest? He was uncertain, but he still put his hand on the fire dragon grass. In any case, art of aged gold wouldn't harm the ling herb, so it wouldn't hurt to try. The dark gold grains of sand entered the inside of the fire dragon grass from Zuemo's fingers. His consciousness, carried with the aged gold energy, entered the interior of the grass as well. The interior of each ling grass was a different world. The inside of ling grains was green, and the interior of the fire dragon grass was completely bright red. Before he could examine clearly, a dark and icy presence locked onto his consciousness. Contrary to expectations, Zuemo's heart calmed. What he was most afraid of was not knowing what was happening. Now that he knew where the problem was, it was much easier. In any case, Ji has the aged gold energy, specializing in killing all kinds of pests. A crowd of silver-colored armored worms slowly climbed around the interior of the fire dragon grass. Their presence wasn't very strong, not as vicious as the aphids he met the first time. Zuemo felt slightly relieved. His abilities with art of aged gold were limited. If it was some strong worms, it wasn't that he would have no solution, he would also be in danger. He pushed the aged gold energy, sweeping towards the crowd of silver-armored worms. The silver-armed worms weren't panicked. They only kept on chewing the plant material in front of them. The aged gold energy was like a gold cloud, quickly surrounding these silver-armored worms. Zuemo's heart settled. He believed he would quickly finish the battle. The aged gold energy was much stronger than before, and he was full of confidence. After 10 minutes, sweat appeared on Zuemo's forehead. He had encountered trouble. No matter how much power he put into the aged gold energy, it was all useless against these silver-armored worms that were indifferent. He could clearly feel the ever-successful aged gold energy be blocked off, unable to move an inch. The aged gold energy, as sharp as steel sand, couldn't even leave a single mark on the surface of these silver-armored worms. Such hard shells. Third grade was really third grade. Even the pests it had were stronger. Zuemo wanted to cry. Art of Aged Gold was his only method of dealing with pests. And the other person in the sect whose Art of Aged Gold was at the second level, Guolu Shixiang, was still lying on the sickbed. What should he do now? The sweat poured down even more, his heart becoming panicked. Wei Xing Shixiang was depending on this to Zhuji. Please don't let anything happen in his hands. Just when Zuemo had no ideas, Pu Yao suddenly appeared. Tisk tsk. Can't even deal with the little silver-horned worm. You actually want to become a ling plant farmer? Zuemo suspiciously looked at Pu Yao. You have a way? Not waiting for Pu Yao to speak, he rolled his eyes. Even if you have a solution, I wouldn't ask you. The painful experiences of the past told him to never to even think of trying to take advantage of Pu Yao. It would be a cruel death. But inside, he silently noted down the name, Silver-Horned Worm. He thought he would go research at some other time to see if he could find Silver-Horned Worm. Pu Yao wasn't angry. A faint curve to his mouth, his crimson right eye slightly narrowed. Hee, the way you are now, it really makes one feel hurt. Oh, that what's his name Shixiang of yours, the jade stick he gave you. Isn't there some basic sword moves there? You could try to use sword moves with your aged gold energy. That works. Zuemo was puzzled. You could try and find out. Pu Yao left behind before disappearing. Pu Yao was very strange today. Very strange. Even though he hadn't interacted with Pu Yao for a long time, couldn't see how deep he went. But Zuemo was very clear that this guy wasn't someone good. And suddenly becoming kind today, it wasn't normal, definitely not normal. However, the only thing he could pick out was the abnormality. As to why he was strange, he couldn't find a reason no matter he spent a long time pondering it. This question was quickly thrown to the side. What was most important at this time was solving these silver-horned worms. Pu Yao's words, he was half convinced. The sword moves recorded in the jade stick that Wei Xing Shixiang gave him were some of the most basic moves. There wasn't anything deep in them. Even someone like Zuemo who had never practiced the sword before could easily understand. To use sword scripture with aged gold energy? He sat on the ground, sinking into his thoughts. A beat later, he suddenly jumped up, the dark gold aged gold energy appearing at his fingertip. The aged gold energy was a cloud that seemed to be composed of gold sand, slowly revolving, extremely pretty. The aged gold energy suddenly restlessly turned, rapidly shrinking. Seconds later, it formed into a dark small sword the size of a grain. Calling it a small sword was really an overstatement. It was like a thin gold flake that had been flattened from a gold grain. But Zuemo didn't care. He had only ever seen just a few flying swords in total. In this area, his imagination was nothing to write home about. He gestured each movement according to the moves in the jade stick. Very quickly, he found the benefits to his consciousness becoming stronger. He could easily manipulate the tiny sword. It was really just a few moves. He quickly familiarized himself. Entering the inside of the fire dragon grass again. The silver-horned worms were still unconcernedly chewing on the inside material of the fire dragon grass. Zuemo didn't send a greeting and directly sent the sword over. Ding! The indifferent silver worm shook, sparks flying on the silver armor. Effective. Zuemo was very happy. One blow after the next. According to the sword moves in Wei Xing Shixiang's jade stick, Zuemo's hand wasn't lenient. Ding 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 ding. The shell of the silver-horned worm was incomparably hard. The sparks flew but there still weren't any cracks. But to Zuemo, the silver-horned worms were the best targets. No matter how hard, it was still a target that wouldn't fight back. Zuemo forgot himself. The rawness and unfamiliarity of sword moves slowly became familiar. The strength of the little aged gold swords gradually started to show itself. Ding! The sound was majorly different than before. On the armor of the silver-horned worm, a crack had been chopped out. Zuemo had originally started to become tired. Using the sword moves to manipulate the aged gold little sword, it used up more ling energy than using aged gold energy. And it required much more from his spirit. If he hadn't achieved one breath in embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation before, His spiritual power wasn't enough to do this. Finally breaking through the silver-horned worm's defenses, Zuemo became motivated and sent out a flurry of blows. Ding ding ding! The silver-horned worm finally couldn't endure it, and with a crack, suddenly exploded. Fighting with me serves you right. Zuemo stared with disdain at the corpse of the silver-horned worm. However, his spirit became unstable, and he hurriedly came out of the fire dragon grass. He had used up a lot of his Ling energy and consciousness. He hurriedly sat cross-legged to recover his Ling energy. His Ling energy recovered very quickly, but the usage of his consciousness hadn't recovered. To recover his consciousness, the only thing he could think of, the only way, that was embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Was this Pu Yao's aim? He couldn't help but hesitate. When his gaze landed on the fire dragon grass, he struggled for a second, but still decided to first exterminate these silver-horned worms. This was the first time he practiced embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. After achieving the first breath, it seemed that as soon as he sat down, the breath was circulating in his body. A feeling of numbness that he never felt before seemed to spread from inside his bones. His entire person felt like it was flying. His mind was calm, as though it was a void. That was when he found that at some unknown time, in the sky of his sea of consciousness, there was an addition of one star. The star wasn't very bright. It was actually really dark. The flickering bright fire took away its light. Normally, he wouldn't have even noticed it. An illusion? Zuemo wasn't certain. The addition of a star, his sea of consciousness becoming a sea of fire. All these changes, they didn't bring many changes to him. Waking up from his mediation, Zuemo's mind was refreshed. He made an inspection. His spirit seemed to be just a sliver stronger. He was both joyed and worried. It was a good matter for his spirit to be stronger. But the lesson of last time when he reached one breath was right in front of his eyes. After destroying these silver-horned worms, he definitely wouldn't practice it anymore. He told himself inside. That extremely comfortable feeling just now made him automatically intoxicated, and he was deeply alert. The most beautiful didn't have to be fish soup, it could be poison. Pu Yao's abnormality made him feel that the chance it would be poison was extremely large. Gradually becoming fluent, Zuemo's efficiency increased greatly. The sword moves became even more penetrating. The silver-horned worms that he could do nothing about previously, in just a few strokes, they were taken down. Zuemo felt exhilarated, but he was extremely rational and didn't practice anymore. The fire dragon grass, rid of the silver-horned worms, instantly sent out exuberant vitality. Zuemo had found a pattern. If he killed the natural predators inside the plants, the corpses of these natural predators would become the best fertilizers. In the next few days, he guarded the fire dragon grass, fearful of another accident. This day, like normal, he came to Cold Mist Valley. What was this? His gaze was on the fire dragon grass. A rice-sized red fruit. Before, this fruit had been green, but now it was red. But with his pitiful amount of Ling herb knowledge, he couldn't distinguish if this small fruit was really a fruit or a seed. However, no matter if it was a fruit or a seed, it still meant that the growth of this fire dragon plant was very good. It was a good event. What he had been most worried about was that this fire dragon plant would be unaccustomed to the soil, or if the grade would drop. Then he wouldn't have the face to see Wei Sheng Xixiang. In the next few days, he carefully guarded the fire dragon grass. Fire dragon grass was a classical yang-oriented grass, appropriate for Art of Crimson Flame. Each day, Zuemo didn't forget to cast it a few times. The leaves became even more red and bright, and that rice-sized fruit was now about the size of a soybean, the color steadily darkening. Everything was good for Wei Sheng Xixiang to come to the door. Chapter 23 Apparitions. Zuemo looked in shock at Wei Sheng Xixiang. The clothing on Wei Sheng Xixiang's body was ripped to shreds, his entire person an unsheathed sword, exuding a heavy presence. This felt strange to Zuemo. Suddenly the term appeared in his mind. Sword essence. Zuemo suddenly realized. Congratulations, Xixiang. Hearing this, Wei Sheng smiled. The sword essence surrounding his body seemed to have been pushed by an invisible hand, suddenly vibrating. The small pebbles on the ground were all thrown up in the air, dust rising. In just a few seconds, the ground underneath his feet was cut into a shallow hole by the invisible sword essence. My apologies, Shitty. My cultivation is limited and cannot control it. Xixiang needs the fire dragon grass? Zuo waved his hand, indicating that he didn't mind. This was the first time he saw someone preparing to Zhuji, and he was extremely curious. Thanks for the trouble, Shitty. Wei Sheng helplessly moved his feet. The dirt hole under his feet was almost up to his knees. Understanding that Wei Sheng was at a crucial time, Zuo didn't waste words. Xixiang, please come with me. Finishing, he started to sprint in the direction of Cold Mist Valley. Behind him came the continuous sound of cracking. Anywhere that Wei Sheng Xixiang passed, there were crisscrosses of fine cuts on the ground, little pebbles sent flying away. The two very quickly ran to Cold Mist Valley. Zuo threw out, Xixiang, please wait a moment. He then entered the mist, and in a short while came back out holding the bright red fire dragon grass. He carefully put the grass on the ground, and then quickly jumped to one side. The fine and scattered sword essences creating a shroud around Xixiang were extremely damaging. His heart had trembled on the way here. Wei Sheng bent down to grab the fire dragon grass. He saw the fire dragon grass was like a ball of fire, the color even brighter than before. Joy appeared on Wei Sheng's face. His expression solemn, he bowed to Zuo. Many thanks, Shitty. Finishing, Wei Sheng Xixiang quickly left. Zuo stared dazedly at Wei Sheng Xixiang's back. This was the first time he saw a person's state right before they were going to Zhuji. It was completely different from what he had imagined. So when Li Yingfeng Shiji was entering Zhuji, was it something like this as well? Zhuji, it was called the first barrier for Xiuzha. As expected, it really was extraordinary. His mind was slightly distracted all day. The scene of Wei Sheng's sword essence flying around gave him a tremendous shock. And he still hadn't heard the voice that had announced last time, when Li Yingfeng Shiji had successfully Zhuji. Would it have failed? His heart was full of worry. On its own, fire dragon grass was like a violent poison. Just the slightest misstep, and the Ling energy would collapse. Even more, what Wei Sheng Xixiang had taken was a third-grade fire dragon grass. He had only met Wei Sheng Xixiang twice, but this steel-hearted, indomitable Xixiang made him admire. Before this, he had always felt that he was a very hard-working person, but compared to Xixiang, he wasn't even worth a mention. At midnight, Zuo sat on the roof, absent-mindedly listening to the sound of the sound tablet's broadcast, the worry inside even greater. Just at this time, an extremely blinding light suddenly ascended from a certain location in the mountain, thrusting up at the sky. Clang! Like a treasure sword being unsheathed, iron and stone striking, resonating in Wukong Mountains. With such a large commotion, the other disciples were all startled awake, each one running out, their faces full of awe as they looked at the sword-like light that seemed to have pierced the heavens. On the rooftop, Zuo's expression was also dumbstruck. Inside he was both happy and surprised. Happy because this presence was Wei Sheng Xixiang. What made him surprised was that this sword-like light gave him tremendous pressure. He couldn't help but think of the snow-white sword essence that had wounded his sea of consciousness. The two were extremely alike, but while this one wasn't as vast and icy as the snow-white sword essence, Xixiang's sword essence had an honest and concentrated flavor. Zuo's understanding of the sword was pitiful, but in that instant, he was certain that it was Xixiang's sword essence. He dazedly stared at this sword tip that was thrusting into the clouds, both happy and envious. There wasn't much of a sound when Li Yingfeng Shiji had Zhuji. The fact that Xixiang's Zhuji had influenced the sky, he was really awesome. Such an apparition, not just Wukong Mountain was alerted, but the sects in the surroundings were all alarmed. He could see countless swords flying like meteors over. No one noticed that at some unknown time, the sect leader and the other Shirshu were already waiting in the sky. Our sect will rise. The third Shirshu Yen Li's voice was slightly trembling. There wasn't a hint of the smile that was usually hanging on his face. Just the reverse, there were tears. The sect leader Pei Yuan Ran also couldn't bear it. Right there in the sky, he suddenly knelt down, facing the east, his voice choked as he kowtowed 3 times. This unworthy disciple thanks our sect's ancestors for your protection, protecting our sect's passage to continue. Raising his head, tears streamed down his face. Yen Lu and Xian Yen also knelt down, kowtowing 3 times towards the east. The 3 stood, each of them smiling from ear to ear, like they were drunk. Even Xian Yen, the one most stern usually, had a slight blush on his face. Such a pity 4th Shimmy is still traveling and hasn't returned. Otherwise, if she saw this scene, it's unknown how gratified she would be. Pei Yuan Ran's expression recovered as he sighed ruefully. Yen Lei felt the same. To be able to see this, I have no regrets left in this life. Pei Yuan Ran berated. Shitty, don't speak nonsense. Our sect is going to rise. We need to put in all our effort and nurture Wei Sheng, so that we will not disappoint the expectations our previous teachers have. Yen Lu nodded. Shi Xiang is right. He suddenly turned his face, brows furrowing, and said, slightly displeased, there's a lot of guests today. A cold light flashed through Pei Yuan Yan's eyes, his voice calm as he ordered. But tonight isn't the time to receive them. Second Shitty, do not let them disturb Wei Sheng. Yes. Xian Yen, who had calmed down, was as stern and grave as iron and stone. Just the one word was full of ice. No matter if it was the Xiuzha that were flying towards Wukong Mountains, or the outer sect disciples raising their heads to look, they all felt a snow-white light flash across their eyes. Before they could react, a terrifying sword essence, vast and filled with an apocalyptic presence, spread over their heads. Everyone stilled in shock, uncontrollably retreating. A gigantic snow-white dragon, taking over half of the sky, moved its nimble body as it flew in the night sky. That pair of eyes like ice crystals were full of arrogance. From very far away, a cold and fierce presence could be felt. Only at this time did the people remember. Wukong Mountains had 4 Xiuzha that were Jindan. Is it Ice Dragon Sword? An ancient-sounding voice came from far away. Xian Yin raised his eyelids, desire for battle flickering through his eyes, as he responded frigidly. This one is Xian Yin. On Wukong Mountains, all the outer sect disciples with raised faces sighed in shock. Xian Yin Shirshu, who usually had a stone face, actually had such a big reputation. The person from far away didn't speak. It is too late today, and coincidentally, it is the time that this young disciple is Juji. We really cannot receive everyone, and have to disturb you. Please forgive us. Why don't everyone find another day to come? This sect will prepare for your arrival. Pei Yuan Yan's authoritative voice could be heard near and far. Didn't think my Dong Fu would have someone as skilled as Ice Dragon Sword. Sorry for the discourtesy. Wukong Sword Sect will soon prosper. This poor cultivator Tian Songzi first congratulates you. Today is inconvenient, then I will disturb at some other day. The voice echoed until it couldn't be heard any longer. The cultivators in the surroundings were greatly surprised. They hadn't thought the person who came was Tian Songzi. Tian Songzi was renowned in the entire Dongfu. He was the descendant of Dongfu Xianren, and the true ruler of Dongfu. Even Pei Yuan Ra was surprised. He hadn't thought that the disturbance here would startle Tian Songzi. Tian Songzi's reputation was extremely high in Dongfu. His rumored cultivation was also astounding. But he truly was a leader of a sect. He held his composure and shouted, "Take care, elder." The Xiuzha that had wanted to explore saw the situation, and tactfully scattered away. Someone that even Tian Songzi would treat respectfully, they wouldn't dare be rash. Smart people recognized that Wukong Sword Sect's position would rise in Dongfu. Most of them knew that Wukong Sword Sect had 4 Jindan Xiuzha. However, normally Wukong Mountain rarely conversed with outsiders. The 4, other than Yen Lu who was mainly in charge of the operations, the other 3 basically didn't step outside the doors to the mountain. Intelligent people decided to go find out more about Ice Dragon Sword. Such a strong person, yet silently living in a little mountain, it was really puzzling. Zhuemo didn't hear a word of the conversation between the sect leader and Tian Songzi. He stared dumbstruck at the snow-white dragon that was swimming in the night sky. Just like he could conclude that the sword energy that was piercing the sky was due to Wei Sheng Shixiang, he recognized that snow-white dragon that was twisting in the sky. It was that sword essence that was in his sea of consciousness. On the outside appearance, the two were greatly different, but for some reason, he was abnormally certain that this dragon and the white sword essence that he had only seen 2 times weren't inherently different. He blanked. So that night, it had been Shirshu. This conclusion made his heart leap. He suddenly remembered the main culprit was still in his consciousness. This thought instantly made his heart madly shake. If the sect leader and the others knew that Pooh was in his consciousness, he couldn't help but shudder, his teeth chattering. He looked again at the snow dragon in the sky, coldness creeping up his heart. He always had the feeling that this snow dragon could discover Pooh Yao at any time, and then would unhesitatingly swoop down and tear him to pieces. This feeling became stronger and stronger. He even felt that the gigantic dragon was always staring at him. His soul leaping, he couldn't do anything except frantically escaping down the rooftop and shrinking back into his rooms. When he returned to the seclusion room, he finally recovered. After a few seconds, his heartbeat calming, his tongue was dry. The damn Pooh Yao. Zuemo couldn't help but curse again inside. He suddenly remembered that Pooh Yao could come out on his own. This thought made him instantly panicked. Pooh Yao, that crazy maniac, don't create a disturbance now. He quickly sat, forcing his heart to calm, and entered his consciousness. His sea of consciousness seemed to have a violent wind blowing, the dark red flames furiously dancing, like a crowd of beautiful naga twisting their heart-stopping waists. Pooh wasn't sitting on the gravestone like he normally did, but was standing in front of the gravestone like a spear. The smooth satin-like black clothing flapping in the wind, the black hair flying in front of his forehead, but still covering his left eye. His blood-red right eye was deep as he gazed at the gravestone. Chapter 24. Finding a different way after the ruckus last night. No one in Wukong Sword Sect got a good night of sleep. In comparison to the other disciples who had gathered together to excitedly discuss, Zuemo was frightened awake. Right now he was on the same boat as Pooh Yao. When he saw the snow dragon, his brain had exploded. Before, he still had a delusion, but now his heart was restless. His heart nervous. If he wasn't extremely fond of this place, he would instantly pack his things and escape without a trace. After being scared witless for a few days, and seeing that nothing had happened, his heart finally landed back above his stomach. Wei Xingxixiang was thrust into the limelight this time. In the area around Dongfu, the news that a genius of Wukong Sword Sect appeared out of the blue, the sword energy piercing the heavens when he entered Juji, instantly made a buzz. As expected, Wei Xingxixiang quickly was taken by the sect head as his disciple, personally bestowing down a 4th-grade flying sword, splitting rainbow. And the person teaching him, however, was Exainyan Shirshu. When the previous inner sect disciples had received their swords, it had all been 3rd-grade flying swords. Even the most talented Luo Li Shixiang wasn't an exception. Such favor. It was the first time for Wukong Sword Sect. And the one who received the sword had been an outer sect disciple previously. When all the outer sect disciples discussed this matter, they all had proud expressions on their faces. But even more was envy that was unable to be hidden. An outer sect disciple that once was a sword servant, skyrocketing to become the most valued 2nd-generation disciple. Wei Xingxixiang's experience was almost every outer sect disciple's dream. Other than more admiration, Zuemo wasn't shocked. He believed that anyone who had seen that jade stick that he had would be just as clam as he was. He admired, but he would not copy Wei Xingxixiang. He didn't have that obsession inside. Fundamentally, he was a lazy person. He was working hard now just so that he could be lazy in the future. Pooh Yao also seemed to have recovered. Just like usual, he sat on the gravestone and listened to the sound tablet. The sea of consciousness hadn't changed. Except that the flames seemed bigger. Zuemo didn't know if it was just his imagination. In any case, it was just a patch of red. The agitated Wukong mountain finally calmed down. Zuemo's life also calmed down. What he reminisced about the most was the life he had before all the apprehension and worry. His life returning to normal, his heart became much peaceful. However, he met trouble. A ling plant farmer required 3 kinds of spells to reach the 3rd level. Zuemo's little art of cloud and rain was at the 4th level. Right now, The one that he had that was most likely to reach the third level was Art of Aged Gold. He even knew how to break through to the third level of Art of Aged Gold. Using sword scriptures to manipulate the aged gold energy was the crucial factor. It was the method that Pu Yao had pointed out that day for him to kill the silver-horned worms. This road also proved his previous hypothesis that Art of Aged Gold was a certain kind of offensive spell. But Zueyemo wasn't dumb. He detected the fishiness. If he walked down this road, then he needed to strengthen his consciousness. The aged gold sword wasn't really a sword. If he didn't have the spiritual power, he couldn't manipulate it. He experienced that deeply when he exterminated the silver-horned worms this time. If his spiritual power had been greater, then the power of the little aged gold sword definitely would have multiplied. If it moved according to his wishes, the sword moves also would be able to unleash their full power. Strengthening his consciousness, then he would have to face a problem, practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. No wonder Pu Yao had been so generous. He was waiting there. Originally Zueyemo, who had been irritated at not finding a way to elevate his Art of Aged Gold, was now having a headache because he could not level up. Hesitating for a long while, in the end he still decided not to raise his Art of Aged Gold. Didn't a Ling Plants farmer need 3 kinds of spells to reach the third level? At the very worst, he'll pick 2 others from the remaining 3 spells. Art of Flora, Art of Crimson Flame, and Art of Earth Energy. He had practiced them all to the 2nd level. But no matter which 2, he had only just arrived at the 2nd level. It was far from entering the 3rd. Originally, Art of Aged Gold had been the only he had the greatest confidence in reaching the 3rd level. But now he had to put it to one side. He really was depressed. Thankfully he still had Jingshur on his hands. At the worst, he could go search to see if there was any jade sticks related to this area that was being sold. The jade stick that he had brought before was just a normal one. It described all 5 spells, but in most places, it just brushed over, and a direction could barely be found. For the majority, it still needed him to comprehend for himself. Most of the jade sticks that were on the market were this version. The true premium ones were with the large sections. Even when it wandered onto the market, it was extremely expensive. In some of the top sects, before each Xiuzhi died, they would use their consciousness to leave behind what they had learned in their lives in the jade sticks and pass them on. These were the highest jade sticks. The jade sticks that held the consciousness and understandings of the elders were distributed to the disciples in the sect with the greatest potential. These young disciples would change themselves in one night, greatly shortening the time they needed to spend cultivating. But for normal Xiuzhi, they didn't even need to think about this kind of things. It was better to walk step by step. Not just that, it was like they were on a dangerous and misty mountain road, carefully climbing up. As to whether they would walk an indirect route, fall and break into pieces, that depended on each individual's luck. Adding on the 20 pieces of 2nd-grade Jingshur that Li Yingfeng gave, Zuemo's wealth was the greatest it had ever been. Even though Pu Yao had spent a large amount, Zueyemo couldn't help but sigh. Even though everyone was cultivating, but of those that were outstanding, how many didn't have anything to their name? Li Yingfeng Shiji's family was wealthy, giving out tens of 2nd-grade Jingshur. Her eyes didn't even blink. This kind of manner, Zueyemo was deeply envious. His pouch was fat. His cultivation was hindered. It was natural that Zueyemo thought about using Jingshur to solve the problem. His goal this time was to buy a jade stick about 1 spell. There were very few people who could practice all 5 kinds of spells at the same time. But there should be more people who were skilled in 1 or 2 types. This kind of spells definitely wouldn't be cheap. He would probably bleed a lot this time. But he had no other choice. Riding the creaking Xiaohuang, he slowly made his way to Dongfu again. As one of the most important towns of Tianyujia, the development of Dongfu was very good, and had attracted a wave of pretty good Xiuzhi. Basically, all the normal requirements could be satisfied here, especially to the kind of lianqi cultivators such as Zueyemo. In a moderately sized store, Zuemo's body was almost lying on the desk, his eyes unblinking as he stared at the other. Bro, I'm saying just buy another one. It's really not expensive. If you want to fix it and add more Ling energy, It wouldn't be cheaper than buying a new one, and it can't level up. The person was holding Zuomo's flying paper crane, Xiao Huang, as he said in a seasoned tone. Looking at the visible cracks on the paper crane, Zuomo was slightly unwilling. After all, this was his first steed. Gritting his teeth, he said, "Just fix it for me. Naturally, I wouldn't give less for the cost." The other shrugged indifferently. "Whatever you say." He took out all kinds of tools. First, he cut out several lengths of green thin bamboo to reinforce the skeleton. Then he glued the cracks in the yellow paper, cutting off the frayed edges. He took out a brush, using cinnabar to carefully mend the seal arrangement before adding in Ling energy. Only when the red cinnabar had disappeared from the surface of the paper crane did he repeatedly put on a layer of liquid, and the seal that had disappeared appeared once again. "All right, I slightly made it stronger. If you're careful, you can still use it for a while." 3 pieces of second-grade jingsher. As expected, the price wasn't different from buying a new one. Zuomo's heart jerked in pain, but he still crisply paid. Walking out of the small store, he stared to walk to the free market and found Fu Jin. Fu Jin saw Zuomo and instantly became alert yellow. "Hey, Moge's here. What do you want this time?" The wily eyes found the copper ring on Zuomo's hand. Instantly he became even more attentive. His eyes were very experienced. That was a talisman, even if the grade wasn't high, but it still meant that Zuomo definitely still had some jingsher in his hands. Zuomo asked, "Do you have anything about Art of Flora? Relating to the 3rd level. Art of Crimson Flame, or Art of Earth Energy would also do." "The 3rd level?" Fu Jin grimaced as he shook his head. "Emoji. You know the market. Whatever spell, once it reaches the 3rd level, it isn't hard to find. Even if it was available, the price TSK. At least 2 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher. 2 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher. Zuomo didn't know what to say about the price, even though he was much wealthier now. But this price was still out of reach for him. 1 piece of 3rd-grade jingsher. It needed 100 pieces of 2nd-grade jingsher. This was only for low-grade jingsher. As the grade increased, the disparity in the exchange rate would become even greater. Like 4th-grade jingsher, at the very least, it would require 500 pieces of 3rd-grade jingsher. 3rd grade was a dividing line. If he could make spellwork jade sticks, Zuomo would have already been selling jade sticks. Disregarding everything else, just based on his 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, if he could make jade sticks, he definitely could sell it for a good price. It was a pity that making a spellwork jade stick wasn't a simple matter. While Zuomo's Little Art of Cloud and Rain might have reached the 4th level, but for the overwhelming majority of the profound parts, he could only grasp but could not convey. Like the jade stick that Wei Sheng Shixiang gave him, it only basically recorded some of his experiences and realizations. It couldn't be considered a spellwork jade stick. Those that could make spellwork jade sticks, they were usually those of high cultivation. They could stand at a higher spot and penetrate through to the core of the spells. The spellwork jade sticks that a Jindan Xiuzha made, and one that a Ningmai made, the price was astronomically different. The Ling plant jade stick that Zuomo brought had been made by a Ningmai. Many of the part inside were not adequately described. The most common spellwork jade sticks on the market were for the stage of Zhuji. They frequently could get sold for a pretty good price. Since once one entered Zhuji, they had some wealth. This was also the reason that why the spellwork jade sticks for Lianqi cultivators were so rare. The majority of those in the stage of Lianqi were poor bastards. And Tianyujie. It was a district under the jurisdiction of Kunluanjing. The mainstream was Sword Xiu, so there was much less spells in the other areas. Zuomo couldn't help but be disappointed, even though Zuomo's face was paralyzed, but Fu Jin still sensitively detected his disappointed. He thought before suggesting, "Mog could try taking a look at the notice altar." Zuomo instantly hit his head in frustration. How could he have forgotten that place? Each sect would always encounter all sorts of problems, like the strange disease of the Ling fields that Wukong Sword sect had encountered this time. If the sect could not solve it, they would post to the boards in hopes of those with extraordinary talent that could aid them through their difficulties. After that, everyone found the convenience inside and more people asked for aid at the boards. Consequently, they created a specialized temple to post notices, which was called the Notice Altar. This also became the place many Xiuzhi used to find jobs, especially those with a cultivation of lianqi or zhuji. Of course, posting a message required paying a fee, and the post would clearly state the payment. Gratefully giving thanks to Fu Jin, Zuo started heading for the Notice Altar. Chapter 25 Fourth Shirgu. The Notice Altar was in the southern part of Dongfu, and it was also the most prosperous and busiest part of Dongfu, because he had already joined a sect, and taking care of the Ling fields and cultivation had taken up almost all of his time. Zuo had never been to the Notice Altar before. This was why he hadn't thought of this place at the beginning. Stopping at the Notice Altar, he couldn't help but inhale sharply. Looking out, countless posts made from cloth banners pointed at the sky like a forest, spreading out into the horizon. Under each banner, people's heads moved. The stream of people also moved slowly. Zuo was in awe at the scene. Dazedly, he followed the stream and entered the Notice Altar. This sect has a pair of fiery gold eyes beast pups. Requires 1 zookeeper. Requires cultivation above intermediate level of zhuji. 5 or more years of experience in animal care. Salary generous. This sect is clearing out Ling fields. Needs large number of body cultivators, above lianqi 5th level. Includes residence and food. 10 pieces of first-grade jingsher each day. In just a quick while, Zuo's eyes started to blur. Just at this time, someone came up. Bro, what? It's hard to search. I have the complete table of content for the entire Notice Altar, detailed and accurate. It is updated at the first time. How about it? Do you want a copy? How much? Zuo asked cautiously. Not expensive, 20 pieces of first-grade jingsher. The person said. Bro, at one look, I can see you are one for doing big things. Time is so precious, wasting it like this is not worthy. Just 20 pieces of first-grade jingsher, it's really worthwhile. 8 pieces. Bro, look at all these notices. Just me alone. How can I collect all of them? I have to support an entire bunch of people. Adding on 2 pieces, I'm very sincere. Bro, we don't have it easy. Zuo turned to leave. The person hurriedly pulled Zuo. Okay, I'll sell it to you at a loss. Looking at the directory that he spent 10 pieces of first-grade jingsher to buy, Zuo was a sorry figure as he escaped from the Notice Altar. He found a less busy place nearby and sat down. That was a really scary place. He looked with trepidation at the bustling Notice Altar. Adding Ling energy to the jade stick, there were more than 1,500 posts in the directory, a huge variety. Everything was there. After a long time, Zuo finally found an order and started to look down. After a full 2 hours, he finally raised his head, his eyes full of disappointment. It wasn't that there weren't related posts that paid with spells, but not one of them were something that he could accomplish. Thinking about it now, Fu Jing was right. When any spell reached the 3rd level, the price also changed drastically. Discontentedly returning on the flying paper crane, Zuo's expression was blank. When he returned home and saw Weisheng Xixiang standing outside his door, he couldn't help but blink. Weisheng Xixiang didn't seem to have changed much from before. Still clad in rough cloth, even though he still gave others the feeling of being as sharp as a sword, but it was much more restrained than before. It could be seen that Weisheng Xixiang's cultivation was much deeper than before. Even when Zuo was still far away, he already detected it. Shitty has really made me wait. He smiled as he greeted. Weisheng Xixiang's warmth that was just like before made Zuo very surprised and slightly moved. The attitudes of inner sect disciples towards outer sect disciples were usually extremely bad, and those of low birth, and had an accomplished cultivation, their arrogant manner was the normal state. If Xixiang has something, just send a notice, why wait so long outside the door? Zuo solemnly replied. Weisheng took out a small box from his bosom, and handed it to Zuo. The fire dragon grass seed won't be of any use in my hands, but at least it's 3rd grade, so it would be a pity to throw it out. Shitty is skilled in planting, so this is given to Shitty. Zuo was greedy about wealth, but facing the little box, he didn't hold out his hand. The seed of a third-grade fire dragon grass. It wasn't a question to sell it for a few tens of pieces of second-grade jingshi. Xixiang has successfully Zhuji, and there would be many places that would require jingshi in the future. Wei Xing interrupted his words, shoving the wooden box into Zuomo's chest. Don't be chatty. I'm telling you to take it. My heart is for the sword, and doesn't like other things. Holding the wooden box, Zuomo didn't know what to say. Shidi has outstanding talent, and should work hard to not fail to live up to this good vessel. He urged. Very soon I will enter the sword cave to study. When I come out, Shidi should have successfully Zhuji. For some reason, Zuomo's heart warmed and burst out. I definitely will successfully Zhuji. Then I won't worry anymore. It's a pity that Shidi isn't interested in the sword. There was a hint of pity in Wei Sheng's expression. Zuomo smiled. It isn't bad being a ling plant farmer. Jingxi is a very dependable thing. Haha, Wei Sheng roared with laughter. That's so true. I won't bid farewell. When I come out, us brothers will drink. Finishing, he swept away. Even when Wei Sheng Xixiang had walked a long ways off, Zuomo's heart was still slightly excited. No matter if Wei Sheng Xixiang was deliberate or not, but this bit of solicitude, he would firmly remember. From when he opened his eyes, what he faced was a completely unfamiliar world. The sect leader that picked him up had asked a few words, before he was never seen again. He was like a newborn baby that started to dumbly learn bit by bit everything in the surroundings. His strange zombie face, and the ignorance about the affairs of the world caused him to receive endless mockery and ridicule. The only thing he was glad about was that the heavens had left behind some assets for him. A cultivation of Lianqi 5th level. The setbacks he endured everywhere didn't make him sink, but actually stirred up the stubbornness in his bones. He cultivated day and night, used the rain of little art of cloud and rain, to fill the dry pond drop by drop. After that, the treatment he received gradually changed, piling on the insincerity and worldliness, deliberately getting close to the other disciples in the sect, and earning a pretty good reputation. But that alienation inside, it gradually deepened with time. Wei Sheng Xixiang, who he only had met 2 times before, it was the first time he felt a sincere concern. Before this, he wasn't interested in Zhuji, that astounding sword essence in his sea of consciousness, while it had stirred up some interest and power, but quickly, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, had completely made him lose interest in power. For him, power was undoubtedly very far away, but Wei Sheng Xixiang's exhortations today made him suddenly feel that he needed to Zhuji. This feeling was so fierce, from the moment it left his mouth. He felt that, no matter what, he had to complete Zhuji. 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 It was the first barrier in the long journey of cultivation. For those disciples in the large sects, Zhuji was so easy that it was like stepping over a doorstep. But for normal Xiuzha, this would decide their status. Those that were in the stage of Zhuji basically had left behind the lowest level of work. Their income enough for those as greedy as Zuomo to have red eyes. But there was a high degree of difficulty in Zhuji, especially to someone like Zuomo, who only had the kind of mainstream street trash like 10 Principles scripture. To finish Zhuji, it needed luck and character. Other than that, the success of Zhuji depended on whether the wallet was full or not. The lingdan and ling herbs that were required for Zhuji, not one of them was cheap, and the effects varied greatly. Normal Zhuji dan, it generally was 100 pieces of second-grade jingshi. But this kind of Zhuji dan could only be considered to barely usable. And if one was willing to spill some blood, 2 pieces of third-grade jingshi, they could buy the highest grade of Zhuji dan, the success rate multiplying. This was also why the disciples of the large sects didn't care about Zhuji. For them, 2 pieces of third-grade jingshi was really a small amount. But for Zuomo, 100 pieces of second-grade jingshi was almost his entire wealth. And this was only because his income had been high lately. Before this, did he dare to even think? That was also why he would put his efforts on ling plant farmer. In reality, the difficulty of becoming a ling plant farmer was much higher than Zhuji. This could be seen from how much the salary of a ling plant farmer surpassed a Zhuji cultivator. But the difficulty was based on talent. There wasn't much of a Jingshur investment. What other than this was more perfect for a money-grubbing Zhuamo? But now he wanted to Zhuji. His brain was occupied with this though as he dumbly walked to Cold Mist Valley. Who are you? How dare you enter this sex-important lands? Suddenly a cold shout broke through Zhuamo's thoughts. A matron, appearing about 40-something years old, was standing in the medicine fields, coldly looking at Zhuamo. Zhuamo unconsciously raised his head. When he met the other's eyes, he instantly dropped into ice. The other's gaze was as sharp as a sword, almost piercing him through. Zhuamo shook, as though waking from a dream, his mind whirling quickly. He hurriedly made the bow of a disciple. This disciple as Zhuamo received Hao Min Shiji's orders to temporarily care for the medicine fields here. That girl dares to be lazy. The green-clad matron's face was cold, hinting at the anger. Zhuamo silently grimaced. Right now, he largely knew the identity of this elder in front of him. Wukong sword sect hadn't been big to begin with. The only one that fit the description was the fourth Shirgu, Shifeng Rong. Shifeng Rong spent long periods of time traveling abroad, occasionally returning. Zhuamo had never had the chance to see her before. But supposedly this Shirgu didn't have a good temper, was hard to be close with. Looking at it now, it was true. His only hope now was that fourth Shirgu wouldn't blame him. Hao Ming Shiji was an inner sect disciple. Even if she was punished, it wouldn't be heavy. But his status was low. If he was blamed, he wouldn't have a good ending. Shifeng Rong scanned the medicine fields and the surroundings. Seeing the ling herbs were fine, the coldness on her face retreated slightly. She relaxed her tone to ask, "What are you called?" Disciple Zhuamo greets fourth Shirgu. Zhuamo answered respectfully, "Your care isn't bad." Glancing at Zhuamo, her eyes held praise. Cultivation of Lianqi 8th level. And can be considered ambitious. From today onwards, Cold Mist Valley is under your care. Humph, when Hao Min returns, I will sort her out. Temporary worker turning to actual worker. Zhuamo wasn't very 100 times unwilling, but facing fourth Shirgu's gaze that could cut him up, he perceptively swallowed the words back into his stomach. Inside he muttered, fourth Shirgu was the same as Exinyan Shirshu. They looked at everyone like the others owed them money. This Juji Dan, it is your reward. Zhuamo stared with bright eyes at the Juji Dan in his hands. The 100 times unwilling instantly became 100 times willing. As expected, it was Shirgu Wood was considerate. He praised fourth Shirgu effusively inside. The most basic Juji Dan was 100 pieces of second-grade Jingshur. He had heard that this Shirgu was skilled at concocting pills, but he didn't know what grade this Juji Dan was. Keep cultivating and enter Juji. Your power now, to care for Cold Mist Valley, it isn't enough. Fourth Shirgu's icy voice rang in Zhuamo's ears. Zhuamo, already drowning in joy, hurriedly responded. Shifeng Rong was going to leave when her eyes glanced at Zhuamo's face. Her steps instantly stopped, an astounded expression floating on her cold face. Raise your head. Chapter 26 Appearance changed and mind erased. Zhuamo raised his head. Shifeng Rong walked gracefully in front of him, carefully examining for a few seconds. Her brows suddenly furrowed. You are the child that sect leader Shixiang picked up? Zhuamo blinked, nodding and answered. Yes. You cannot remember anything from before? Zhuamo's heart suddenly started to beat furiously, blood rushing up to his head. He felt that he was trembling, his entire body uncontrollably trembling lightly. He heard his trembling voice answer. Yes. Oh. Shifeng Rong nodded. She hadn't planned on saying anything, turning to leave. Zhuamo almost unconsciously yelled. Shirgu. Shifeng Rong stopped, expression irritated as she looked at him. Zhuamo didn't know where he got the courage to intently stare at Shifeng Rong, eyes full of terror and hope. This disciple has nothing left of the previous memories. What this disciple is called, who are the parents, nothing. Thinking about it every time, the heart is grievously sad, and begs for Shirgu's guidance. Shifeng Rong looked at Zhuamo for a beat and shook her head. For you it's better not to know. Please Shirgu, complete this desire. Zhuamo almost used up all the strength in his body. Shifeng Rong slightly wrinkled her brows, coldly stating. Since you want to know so much, then I will tell you. If I hadn't seen it wrong, You might have been the target of a technique to have your features changed. Someone had changed your appearance. Changed? Zuomo muttered to himself absent-mindedly. As to your previous memories, it should have been erased by someone. I don't know who has such deep enmity against you. Finishing, she gave a look deep with meaning at Zuomo. Changing your appearance or erasing a mind, it all needs great cultivation. You should just obediently take care of the Ling fields for me. It was as though Zuomo was struck by lightning and frozen to his spot. When his mind slowly came back, the sky was dark and fourth Shirgu had left long ago. Zuomo was muddle-headed, his eyes bleak. Changed appearance, erased mind. So his memory had been erased by someone. So his face had been changed. So that dream. Why? Why was it like this? He lowered his head, his fists unconsciously cleaning, knuckles cracking, fingertips white. The bamboo-like body was like a dry stalk of grass waving in the wind, small and weak. The temperature of Cold Mist Valley in the nighttime was extremely low, humidity high. Small tendrils of cold permeated into Zuomo's body, and also into his heart. The puzzle that had perplexed him finally had been solved at this time. But even more puzzles were lying in front of him. Who am I? Who did it? The messy mind instantly quieted. Zuomo raised his head, his eyes as though they were dyed by blood, a patch of red. He had expected that he would be furious, would shout. But he didn't. His heart was encased in ice, as though he was an outsider watching from the sidelines. His heart was an ice body. Under the thick layer of ice, a vague hint could be seen to the undercurrents roiling in the deep. Fourth Shirgu's words echoed in his ears. Someone that even Fourth Shirgu would call of high cultivation. At the very least, one of their hairs would be thicker than his leg. Even if he wanted to settle a score, he couldn't manage it. Suddenly everything in these 2 years' sunlight Ling grains. It was like a dream, and an invisible great hand forcibly squeezed it to dust. It was gone. He relaxed his fingers, stepping in the sea of consciousness where the flames were dancing. Just like normal, Pu Yao was still sitting on the gravestone shrouded in black smoke. Seeing Zuomo, the corner of his mouth rose. Ha 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 ha. Reckless and crazy laughter rang out in the sea of consciousness. Wei Shen closely followed behind the sect leader, and Exanyin Shirshu, as they walked in the back of the mountain. The two elders were both extremely solemn, as they silently walked at the front. Wei Sheng was also cautious as he closely followed. This was a forbidden area of the sect. Master and Exanyin Shirshu had cast more than 20 spells on the way here to open the path. It could be seen just how guarded this place was. He had just entered Juji, his willpower 10 times what it had been previously, but the pressure that the Jinji exuded, it still made him feel as though he was suffocating. So the sect had a place as strong as this. He felt his blood was gradually warming up. He was full of hopes to the sword cave that they were going to arrive at. After walking for 4 hours, the three finally stopped in front of the mouth of a cave. Nervousness came upon both Pei Yuan Ran and Exan Yan's face. The sect leader Pei Yuan Ran said solemnly, "This sword cave, it had been created by this sect's first leader. It was used for the sect disciples to refine their sword essences. Only disciples below Jindan can enter." Some shame suddenly made its way across his face. The ancestors' power was astounding. To open this sword cave, it requires 2 Jindan to simultaneously act. This sect has declined. In the generation above us, there was only 1 Jindan, so the sword cave was never opened. I and your Shirshu practiced our sword essences by ourselves in Yao Hunt. When we reached Jindan, we could not go in. What is actually in this sword cave, we don't know either. You have to explore for yourself. Wei Sheng listened closely, his expression calm. Pei Yuan Ran looked at his disciple, concern in his eyes. Every 10 days, we will prepare enough Ling food for you. Right now, your 4th Shirgu has returned, and you don't have to worry about herbs and Dan. But the sword cave is dangerous, and you need to remember your own safety. You have just entered Juji and your cultivation is low, so in reality, you are not suited to enter the sword cave. But you have immense talent on the sword that we have never seen before. To not hinder you, we have decided to make an exception and let you enter the sword cave. If you encounter any danger, you need to leave the sword cave immediately. The last warning, Pei Yuan Ran couldn't help raising his voice. This sincere and honest disciple in front of him. His talent was astounding and surpassed all of their expectations. He seemed to have been born a sword xiao. Other than his cultivation that needed to steadily progress, any sword scripture that entered his hands would quickly become familiar and flowing. Even the strongest Xian Yin was shocked at Wei Sheng's progress. Other than joy, they couldn't help but be worried. Such a good piece of jade. If they didn't nurture properly, wouldn't it disappoint the ancestors? They had pondered for a long time, and in the end, decided to open the sword cave. Other than the legend about the sword cave in the sect, they hoped that Wei Sheng could practice the complete Void Sword. Void Sword was the strongest sword scripture of the sect, and the greatest accomplishment of the first ancestral master, Wukong Zhenren. But when it came to their generation, they didn't have a complete Void Sword scripture. Like Xian Yan's Ice Dragon Sword scripture, it had been created by one of the ancestral masters, but was not the strongest sword scripture of the sect. Before, they had put their hopes on Luo Li, who only managed to achieve empty sword. Who could have thought that he, who had once been Luo Li's sword servant, would have even greater talent than Luo Li? Even more, while Luo Li had outstanding talent, but his personality was arrogant. Compared to the honest and humble Wei Sheng, he was quickly defeated. In their hearts, Wei Sheng was the present and uncontested head of the disciples. Disciple understands. Wei Sheng's expression was grave. Pei Yuan Ran and Xian Yin exchanged a lot and nodded their heads. Both started to revolve their Ling energy, casting a spell. Two Jindan undertaking a task at the same time. The commotion was extremely alarming. Over their heads, clouds gathered from every direction. In a few blinks of an eye, the small mountain valley was shrouded by roiling black clouds, dark as night. On the outside wall of the mountain cave, countless seals started to light up and flash. The Jinji and the surroundings also lit up, countless seals floating midair, as though they were communicating with the seals that were carved into the mountain. Feeling the shock and shivering that came from the bones, Wei Sheng's calm gaze seemed to have been ignited, and he excitedly went forward. Pei Yuan Ran and Xian Yan's expressions were grave. Both of them simultaneously shouted, "Open!" The seals turned and the formation changed. The mountain cave suddenly became dark and deep, as though it was a void. Wei Sheng, who had already prepared, didn't hesitate and rushed in. At this time, Pei Yuan Ran and Xian Yin finally gave a breath of relief. The two slowly let go of the spell, dispersing the Ling energy on their hands. The seals on the mountain and on the Jinji slowly faded. The thick clouds overhead spread out, sunlight once again reaching the valley. "Let's go, he needs to walk the road himself." Pei Yuan Ran sighed. Of course. Xian Yin treated words like they were gold. In the sea of fire, Zuemo sat not far away from Pu Yao, listening attentively. What is Yaomo? There are many ways of distinguishing, but the most important is the method of cultivation. Xiuzha, extract the Ling energy of the world to use for themselves. What they cultivate is Ling energy. And Yao, what they care about is the spirit shaking the sky, primarily cultivating the spirit. And Mo, that group of people whose absolute majority is stupid to the point of no return, can only cultivate themselves, using their bodies as talismans. Zuemo seemed to understand but didn't really understand. Oh, all of this is nonsense. Okay, we'll talk something practical. Your road wasn't wrong to use sword moves to manipulate the aged gold energy. However, it is a pity that you aren't your Shixiang. Based on your speed, I estimate it would be at least 2 to 3 years. Pu Yao suddenly smiled strangely, revealing half of his crimson tongue. But I have a quick fix. Do you want to try? Quick fix. Zuomo's eyes were lit up, his body slightly leaning forward. Pu Yao's eyes narrowed even more, his voice full of enticement. Exactly, very fast. Within 1 month, you definitely would break to the 3rd level of Art of Aged Gold. Really? Zuemo was slightly suspicious. Pu Yao's expression gave him a bad feeling. You won't know until you try. Pu Yao shrugged his shoulders. There isn't a free lunch in the world. To get power, how can you not pay? Zuemo fell silent. To find the answers, to find the person that changed him, he needed power, desperately needed power. Pu Yao wasn't wrong. To get power, it required a certain cost. He was a little Xiozha who hadn't even entered Juji. What could he rely on to find the answer? The only one he could ask aid from was Pu Yao. He still didn't know what Pu Yao wanted, but did he have a choice? Choices were a question that only those that were strong would face. What he was glad about was that Pu Yao was willing to help him. Regardless of Pu Yao's reasons for doing so, he would accept it. All right. He stood up. Pu Yao's blade-like mouth once again skewed towards one side. He laughed lightly, declaring, what is more simpler than sword scriptures? After being sliced a few thousand times, you'll learn it. The words hadn't landed when a vast snow-white sword essence came down from the heavens, easily slicing Zhuemo's consciousness in half. A heart-wrenching pain came on. Zhuemo felt that his body had been cut into two halves. The pain came on and he straightforwardly fainted. Chapter 27. Looking up in the darkness. Xixiang, is your body ill? Xiaogua had fought for a long time, but couldn't resist asking. It's nothing. Zhuemo's voice was raspy as he replied, and continued to walk forward. Xiaogua looked worriedly at Zhuemo, gathering her courage to state, Xixiang, if you don't feel well, we could change to another day. I said it's fine, so it's fine. Zhuemo glared at Xiaogua. Xiaogua couldn't help but shrink back. She muttered. But Shixji said the body is the most important. Zhuemo decided to shut up himself and not argue with this little girl. He didn't have the energy. Anyone that would have been sliced over and over in half by the sword essence of a Jindan definitely wouldn't have the energy. Pu Yao was insane. Certifiably insane. Xian Yin Shirshu's sword essence far surpassed what he could endure. Each time that he faced the vast snow-white sword essence, he felt that he was at death's door. The terror that seemed to come from the deepest part of his heart made him tremble. The difference between the two of them was too large. So large it didn't have meaning. Even this terror that seemed to happen right before death, Zhuemo would only have a short instant to feel it before his consciousness would be easily cut in half. His only outcome was fainting, but he would quickly wake up because of pain. The enormous pain due to his wounded spirit would wake him up. The only thing he could do was grit his teeth and practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Only that thing could heal his spirit and lessen the pain. Before he could take a breath, another sword essence would drop down from heaven, and he would faint again. Just like that. Slice, faint, wake up due to the pain. Continuously repeating. In one day he would faint a few dozen times. One could imagine, how could his state be good? If he had the time, he would be suspicious of himself of being able to endure to that day. However, Pu Yao wouldn't even give that amount of time to him. Later on the pain turned to numbness. Only when Xiaogua came to find him did Pu Yao temporarily let him go. Xiaogua came to find him, to take a look at the Ling grasses. After the weed incident, all the girls on the eastern peak were scared. Li Yingfeng became an inner sect disciple, entering Yin Li's doors. Other than cultivating, she had to follow her master to learn how to take care of the sect's assets, and had no time to come to the eastern peak. But they girls still remembered zombie Xixiang's Mo, and before Li Yingfeng left, she had especially given notice with him in hopes he could help these female disciples. After a certain amount of time, they would always pull Mo over to inspect the Ling grass. There weren't any big problems with the Ling grass, other than some problems that would occur due to improper care. For Mo, who planted Ling grains, these were all simple problems. Most of the attention of the female disciples was on the Ling beasts. Planting Ling grass was only to provide food for the Ling beast, so they did not put much attention and care into the grass. Looking at the Ling fields being wasted, Mo felt pain. If all of these Ling fields were planted with Ling grains, think how much Jingshur there would be. Xixiang, these little things aren't worth much, but are a token of our thanks. Please accept them. A female disciple handed over the gifts that they had prepared beforehand. He understood the intentions of these female disciples. No matter where, female disciples were always more vulnerable, especially the kind of outer sect female disciples. Li Yingfeng had left, and had no time to spare to look after them. They needed someone with the power to protect them. It wasn't surprising. Most of the female disciples' cultivations were around level 5 or 6 of Lianqi, and no one was able to pick up the burden. Zuoemo thought for a second but accepted the gifts, even if this matter was slightly troublesome. But if they really encountered something serious, he believed that Li Yingfeng definitely would get involved. Seeing Zuoemo take the gift, the crowd of female disciples gave relieved expressions. Everyone had a hard time surviving, Zuoemo thought silently. Returning home, he opened the gift box. Inside were all kinds of ling worms and ling beasts. Similar to mud-turning earthworms, they would even enter a grade. A large majority were first grade, and there were only 1 or 2 at the second grade. But it could be seen that they had taken some care with the ling worms and animals. Even if the grade wasn't high, but they were all quite useful. Pu Yao suddenly erupted, crouching in front of the ling worms and beasts. Talking of playing with worms, TSKSK, us Yaoma is the true masters in this area. He randomly flipped through the ling worms, extremely disappointed. All of these are low level, not worth much. Zuoemo was extremely speechless but couldn't resist objecting. They are outer sect disciples, where would they get high level ones? Pu Yao nipped one up and examined it for a long while. Then he carelessly threw it in front of Zuoemo. Here, this one is barely acceptable. Throw out all the others. The one Pu Yao picked was a black armored worm, slightly larger than a fingernail. He flipped through the jade stick that they had also given to find out that this black armored worm was called black gold worm, fond of eating gold metal. Its wings could be sold for a pretty good price. Other than that, supposedly it could also be used to find sources of water. Zuoemo was slightly disappointed. To him, the black gold worm didn't have much use. Pu Yao's interests clearly had been evoked by these worms. He excitedly said, "Playing with worms, there's a lot to attend to. Especially the techniques, they vary by person. Before I saw one highly skilled with worms called Blood Mosquito Dauren. This guy was very strong. Somehow he managed to create countless souls and bound them to a group of blood mosquitoes. And then he traveled through 100 jia. Every time he reached a jia, he would leave behind a few blood mosquitoes. His enemies had a whole bunch of people and pursued him countless times, but still couldn't kill him. I played with black gold worms before too, but it isn't this kind of cheap trash. There isn't much use in the level ones. This thing's true purpose is to use it to seek out ling veins." "Ling veins?" Zuoemo asked suspiciously. "Isn't it used to seek out water?" "Water?" Pu Yao sneered, retorting. "If you don't know, then don't pretend. That's for low-level black gold worms. Black gold worms above 4th grade can seek out ling veins. 7th grade is able to find ling sources. But 9th grade is the truly good stuff. As to 10th grade, I've never seen one." He continued to explain. "Picking ling worms, definitely have to pick those with good aptitudes. Like this black gold worm of yours. If you raise it correctly, it can enter 4th grade. These other ones, it doesn't even have the chance to increase to 3rd grade. Then, how can this black gold worm raise to grade 4? Zuoemo consulted with a fawning tone. 4th grade black gold worms could find ling veins. This was endlessly tempting to Zuoemo. This time, Pu Yao didn't make it difficult for him. He briskly said, "Very simple. Don't you have a small section of ling vein in your seclusion room? Put this black gold worm, and a piece of pure gold, or in a jade box, and bury it in the area surrounding the ling vein. After a month, it should increase to the 3rd level. To get it to the 4th level, it probably would take about 3 months. All right, let us continue." Pu Yao waved his hand and said impatiently. Before his words landed, a snow-white sword essence once again cleaved Zuomo's mind in half. Zuoemo, who had been memorizing what Pu Yao just said, instantly fainted. After an unknown amount of time, sharp pain once again woke Zuoemo up. Zuomo's first thought was, did he remember the method of raising the black gold worm to the 4th grade? Great, he remembered. So painful. He couldn't help but start to wail, rolling on the ground. Why did it become painful? The tearing pain tortured his fragile nerves. He could only start embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. A ball of air moved continuously through his body, giving out cold stands, seeming to inhale through all the openings in his body, and then spreading through the body. The flames waved in his sea of consciousness. That dim star in the void seemed to have become much brighter. The enchanting sea of flames could not take away its light. Fainting, waking with pain, fainting again, waking up with pain again. The amount of time that Zuoyamo had to comprehend was extremely short. After repeating for a few hundred times, he still endured. Pain is the tastiest thing in this world. You have to finally savor it, enjoy it, the flavor fresh and sweet as it permeates your marrow. Even your soul is trembling. Puyao stuck out his bright red tongue, licking his lips, and slowly said, "Death is like a firework. You can continuously experience the process of blossoming. How lucky you are." "Damned Rinyao," Zuoyamo recited in his mouth. However, his eyes were open to the widest, unwaveringly staring at that lightning-fast snow-white sword essence. He knew that the kind of pain that was coming. Just like Puyao had said, his soul was trembling, regardless of how many times he had been cut. But whenever he practiced facing that snow-white sword essence, he was still terrified, incomparably terrified. When he was clear-headed, he didn't dare to even think about it. He was afraid that any memory would make his fragile psychological barrier instantly collapse. His trembling bones and flesh was like a blade of grass that was going to break any second in the storm. Maybe the next second he would fall down. But his eyes still firmly stared at the front, the direction that the snowy white sword essence would appear from. But Xianyan Shirshu's sword essence, was it something he could see clearly? The difference between the two was like the sky and earth. Xianyan Shirshu was a tried and tested Jindan, a sword shio that even Tian Songzi admired. And Zuoyamo was only an outer sect disciple with a cultivation of Lianqi 8th level. The total amount of time that Xianyan Shirshu had spent in the flying sword was over 200 years, and Zuoyamo hadn't even learned the most basic sword arts. On the surface, all of this looked futile. However, he still trembled as he stared fixedly at the front, his mouth unconsciously cursing, "Damned Rinyao, damned Rinyao." Snow white, blindingly bright, flying down from the sky like the Milky Way. Zuoyamo tried his best to widen his eyes. At this moment, his body stopped trembling, the mutters from his mouth gone. The entire world was a patch of snow white. He needed to strenuously search in this sea of snow white, search for the quintessence of this sword essence. The time that was given to him was extremely short, not even the blink of an eye. He was like a crazy gambler, betting on that chance that wasn't even 1 in 10,000. However, he didn't have a choice. He didn't have another road. His pupils suddenly dilated, and it didn't have the time to recover. Whoosh, the snowy white sword essence sliced Zuoyamo in two. After an unknown period of time, it was still the sharp pain that woke Zuoyamo up. Opening his eyes, Zuoyamo wanted to roar with laughter, but when it came up, it became groans and wails. "Ah, so painful. Ah." Fighting to climb up, he resisted the great pain and started embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Strands of coolness entered his body. The pain instantly lessened greatly. When he opened his eyes again, they were full of ecstasy. Chapter 28. The Doorways. Zuoyamo finally found the doorway. This sword essence appeared to look like snow, but he managed to faintly see countless smaller sword essences. These tiny icicle-like sword essences were enormous in number, and were densely packed together, moving in layers. Each tiny sword essence was like a drop of water, and countless drops of water created the ocean, the movements the tide. Xianyan Shirshu's sword essence was like a little tide, a little icicle tide. For the first time he forgot the pain from his injured mind. The scene he had just seen was extremely short, but what he had seen was enough for him to think for a long time. Dazzling tiny sword essences like ice crystals, moving like the tide. In the vastness and danger was a certain kind of beauty. Even if it was someone like him that didn't understand the sword, he couldn't help but sigh in amazement. He suddenly realized that the snow dragon that Xianyan Shirshu had released wasn't a real one. It was also constructed out of countless snow-white thin sword essences. Dazedly standing in the yard, mind enthralled until deep into the night. Early morning on the second day, Zuoyamo ran over to Cold Mist Valley, changing from temporary worker to official worker, and adding on a Zhuji Dan, for the money-grubbing zombie. It hit the key points and he put more care in. He was clear on the goal that he wanted to find answers, but he deeply understood the matter had to be done step by step, especially when it came to the kind of outer sect disciples like him that had nothing. Compared to before, his workload was much greater now. Fourth Shirgu had given him a jade stick. Inside were all the points that needed to be attended to for all kinds of ling herbs. About 90% of it were things that he had never known before. For him, it was a completely new challenge. But luckily he could slowly explore. The ling herbs in the medicine fields looked to be in great condition at the moment. In the corner of the medicine fields, the fire dragon grass had already sprouted. The seed from the fire dragon grass that Wei Sheng Xixiang had given him had been planted. Today, he needed to accompany the female disciples to Dongfu. It was called accompaniment, but truthfully, it was more like protection. Sitting on the flying paper crane, Zuemo followed about 30 meters behind the female disciples. This group of women were really chatty. The sounds of their chatter could be heard from far away. Hearing it, Zuemo felt irritated. After being fixed and improved, the flying crane was much steadier and comfortable. He thought silently that the 3 pieces of jingsher that he paid was really worth it. Sitting on the paper crane with nothing to do, he started to once again examine Xing Yin Shirshu's sword essence. Even though he wanted to die each time, but he knew very well how valuable this experience was. A chance to learn from Xing Yin Shirshu, other than Wei Sheng Xixiang, for an outer sect disciple like him. He didn't even need to think about it. He didn't know why Pu Yao would keep Shirshu's sword essence. But for Zuemo, this sword essence was undoubtedly a treasure trove. It wasn't likely for him to learn all of it. But just learning a little was enough for him to reap endless benefits. Just at this time, a clamor came from the front, startling Zuemo from his musings. His heart instantly wasn't happy. Several unfamiliar male Xiozha seemed to be in a tangle with his sex female disciples. Zuemo sighed. These days, it wasn't easy to accept gifts. Taking down the paper crane, he slowly walked forward. This was the main path to Dongfu. Zuemo wasn't afraid that the other would really do something too outrageous, so he was extremely confident. Heard that your Li Yingfeng Shiji went into Zhuji. Good news, good news. The male Xiozha in the front said in a smooth tone. The other male Xiozha in the surroundings laughed. At this time, a male Xiozha fawningly said, Xixiang, I wasn't wrong. The level of these women, they are much tender than the shrews in our sect. True, true. The leader smiled nefariously, warning. But be careful, if they head what you said, you'll have a good time. Haha, of course. Zuemo lightly coughed. The female disciples instantly created a path. Since he had accepted the things, he couldn't really just stand by. What is this? Eerie one, blocking the road for looks? Zuemo walked out of the crowd, stealing a look at the other, smiling coldly. This group of people looked like the dregs at a glance, each of them with the head of a deer and the eyes of a mouse. Especially the leader. Looking at that face, Zuemo had the impulse to raise his fists and beat him into a bun. Compared to the others in the sect, Zuemo's experience on the outside was much richer. His eyes could be said to be shrewd. This group looked just like the kind that wasn't mainstream. To deal with this kind of people, the more polite, the more they felt that you were soft and easy to bully. In reality, the biggest weapon that Zuemo relied on was the golden sword ring on his hand. There were 3 sword energies stored inside. To use it to scare people was pretty good, so it was a change of owners. The leader smirked, examining Zuemo, the disdain on his face evident. Just Lianqi 8th level and dare to try to be the hero. Really doesn't know your own abilities. Even if Li Yingfeng is here, she wouldn't dare talk like this. Did this person really have a strong background? Zuemo's heart was uncertain, but he didn't show it on his face. Such boasting. With such abilities, why don't you go to our sect's gate to shout? Running here to bully girls, TSK, really strong, really strong. The female disciples in the surroundings covered their mouths and laughed. The person's face became ugly. He snorted. Heard that Wukong sword sect had a genius? Is it such trash like you? Xixiang today will let you know what is manners. His voice landed, and a flying sword suddenly appeared in front of him. Zuemo instantly was stupefied. The other actually had a flying sword. The first word in his mind was Zhuji. He hadn't thought that this mouse-like person was actually Zhuji. Those with only lianqi cultivation could not imprint on flying swords. Even Wei Xingxixiang, before he entered Zhuji, he had never had a flying sword. Incredibly nervous as he stared at the flying sword floating in front of the other, Zuemo swallowed tightly. This was the first time he saw a flying sword. Entirely green, about 3 feet, body narrow, edge sharp, the light gleaming. If the blow landed, a bloody hole would certainly be a result. The expressions of the female disciples also changed dramatically. They hadn't thought that they would encounter a Zhuji Xiuzhi this time. They had originally been full of confidence for Zuemo, but it instantly evaporated. There was a large chasm between lianqi and Zhuji. To have a lianqi face a Zhuji, there wasn't any room at all for resistance. The power of the flying sword wasn't something that a sword energy could contend against. Xiaoguo's apple-like face was pale in fright, terrified as she looked at the flying sword. The person laughed darkly. Let's get you to have a good taste of Ye's green point sword. At the same time, his fingers fused together as they swept through the air. It was as though the flying sword was intelligent, as it suddenly sliced toward Zuemo. The instant the other's flying sword moved, Zuemo calmed down. All the nervousness seemed to have disappeared. He stared straight at the flying sword just like how, in these past days, he waited for that snow-white sword essence. The flying sword moved, and his heart instantly became serene. The green flying sword might have looked scary, but this guy's power was limited, and the feeling of danger that it gave him was far below that pure sword essence from Xanyin Shirshu. Only a beautiful surface. The sword essence was flimsy and insubstantial. It actually wasn't condensed into form, simply just unbearable to look at. The Ling energy in his body revolving quickly, he calmly looked at the flying sword speeding closer. In a flash, his fused fingers lifted up and pointed into space. A gold sword energy ripped out of his hands. Ping! A crisp sound, the sword energy accurately hitting a spot 3 centimeters behind the sword point. The flying sword shook slightly. Humph! The other snorted. The Ling energy revolved and the flying sword turned in midair, creating a half circle of light in the air. Extremely beautiful. Ping! A sound of metal crashing suddenly sounded. The flying sword suddenly stopped, the half circle of light dissolving. It was like a dancing goddess right at the climax when she suddenly sneezed. All the beauty and elegance instantly disappeared. The other was shocked and angry. He could see the person in front of him was relying on a talisman. However, being interrupted 2 times by the other, and the other was still unharmed, he felt it a blight on his reputation. Facing a lianqi disciple, and 2 of his moves were ineffective. If this passed into the sect, his Xixiang would laugh. The previous 2 moves had only been with the intentions of teaching a lesson, but now, he didn't care that much and furiously revolved his Ling energy. The worst that could happen was being punished after getting back. Gathering the Ling energy, the power of the flying sword was drastically different. The flying sword flew on top of Zuemo's head, a skin of faint sword energy appearing on the sword, emitting a whining sound like an excited animal preparing to leap at its prey. Zuemo raised his head. Shining in his narrowed eyes was a hint of excitement and craziness. Hitting the target 2 times in a row greatly increased his confidence. He had no experience fighting against anyone else previously. Last time with Li Yingfeng Shiji, it had only been 1 move. And facing Xanyin Shirshu's sword essence in his sea of consciousness, he didn't even have the power to resist. Not just resist, in front of the vast sword essence, he couldn't even manage to raise a finger. But facing the flying sword here, he had successfully blocked the other's 2 attacks. Just this kind of battle success, it was enough for him to be proud. But at this time, he was completely caught up in a kind of strange excitement and zealotry. He suddenly had an insane idea. Break this flying sword. He didn't know why he would suddenly have such a crazy idea. But this idea was extremely intense once it appeared. So intense that he didn't go to even think if it was realistic. The time wasn't enough for him to think. Under the persuasions of this crazy idea, he also gathered up the Ling energy in his body. Narrowing his eyes, he closely followed the green flying sword above his head. Scenes passed in front of his eyes. the pure, concentrated, vast and dangerous sword essence of Xanyan Shirshu, as though it was a tide of icicles, seemed to be even clearer in front of his eyes. It was like a great entity, slowly moving, and that feeling of cold didn't lessen in the least. Every bit of pain when his consciousness was cleaved seemed to become abnormally clear at this time. He didn't know if it was the stimulation from the pain, but his consciousness was extremely clear, as though everything in the surroundings had calmed. The Ling energy in his body swelled and rushed towards the golden sword ring. He raised his right hand. His fingers fused together as they pointed at the air. To be able to survive Yao Hunt, then he was already not a simple character. And to gain a reputation in Yao Hunt, it definitely meant the other was a strong one. He knew this kind of common knowledge. Just at this time, the two suddenly raised their heads looking forward. Such strong sword essence. Liang Luo's expression changed and urged the green bull under him. The warm and slow green bull became a blur, and then he disappeared. Shi Xiang was also slightly shocked. He hurriedly pushed the green bull and vanished. Zui Mo felt the right hand that was wearing the golden sword ring was 30,000 caddies heavy. Raising 1 inch would use up all the energy in the body. All the Ling energy inside was like a wild stallion off the ropes, uncontrollably and crazily flooding towards the golden sword ring on his right hand. His consciousness sunk into a strange kind of void and serenity. The dancing flames in his sea of consciousness froze, as though under a body paralysis spell, frozen and quiet. In the sky of his consciousness, that star suddenly released a blinding light as it slowly revolved. Sitting on the gravestone, Pu raised his head. Looking at the shining star above his head, he laughed soundlessly. Zui Mo had never felt his mind so clear. Everything seemed to be under his control. He just knew that he needed to quickly send out this sword energy. Otherwise the sword energy was very likely that it would explode in his body, and he would become a mess of blood and flesh. He also knew that on the other's flying sword, with its uneven sword energy, he could find at least 7 holes. Yes, he couldn't find any other descriptor. Holes, this label he felt it was just appropriate. It was much a wondrous feeling. He was drowning in enjoyment. Yet in the eyes of Xiao Guo and the others, at this time Shi Xiang seemed to be a sword exuding coldness. Every gaze that met his eyes felt their hearts shake. The usually warm and peaceful black pupils were entirely gray-white, indifferent and empty, like a borderless tundra. Even Liang Luo and Shi Xiang, who just managed to arrive, were shocked. Liang Luo couldn't control his exclamation. Whoa! Shi Xiang was a much steadier person, and saw in more detail. But when he found the other just had a cultivation of Lianqi 8th level, his expression couldn't help change slightly. The flying sword, shrouded in a green light, turned into a stream of light and howled as it shot at Zui Mo. Just at this time, Zui Mo's slow-moving right hand finally pointed. Hiss! It was like a strange beast baring its teeth. The two noises made by the energies ripping through air were dissonant and entirely different. The temperature in the surroundings plummeted. A white frosted sword energy leapt from Zui Mo's fingertips. Ping! 2 streams of light, one green, one white, furiously slammed together. There wasn't the imagined explosion. The white sword energy that Zui Mo released seemed like a patch of mist, hitting the other's flying sword. The other's flying sword froze, paralyzed in midair. That person's expression changed drastically. Ding! The flying sword landed on the ground, unmoving like a dead fish. The weakness due to all the strength in the body being pulled out caused his consciousness to blank. That strange feeling was like the tide as it quickly retreated. But before that, he managed to make out his ice frost sword energy had accurately hit the flying sword in a spot near the back. That was the most serious hole that Zui Mo had found before. He instinctively chose it as his target of attack. It was a pity that he hadn't broken it. Zui Mo was regretful, but his mind swirled, and he fainted on the ground. The female disciples behind him instantly screamed in fear. That disciple whose expression changed ran over to pick up his flying sword. When he saw the body was full of cracks, he instantly became angry and sad. When he looked at Zui Mo on the ground, hatred rose up in his head. He couldn't help roaring at his other fellow disciples. You group of trash, What are you standing there for? Chop up this damn guy for me. The other disciples murmured, but didn't dare to go up. Zuomo's bravery just now had deeply shocked them. And they weren't dumb. From the looks of it, this incident would get big. Jumping out at this time, wasn't it seeking death? The sect elders were too lazy to care about the little incidents that occurred every day. But if they really wounded someone else, and the others' elders went to the mountain, then they wouldn't be well. Seeing his friends not willing, the leader didn't waste words. His face was twisted as he held up the flying sword and walked towards Zuomo. Xiaogua sobbed as she leapt over Zuomo's body. Her small apple face was full of fear, but she still kept Shixiang behind her. The other female disciples saw the circumstances, exchanged a look and gritted their teeth as they stood up. What do you want? In this daytime, you dare commit a crime? I'm telling you, I've endured you guys for a long time. Come on, chop me up. If we don't find your elders this time to discuss everything, I'm telling you, I'm not a woman. It might have been they got into the swing of things, but as one added a sentence here and another there, the vigor of the female disciples increased. Watching from far away, Liang Luo also found the clue. He said in shock, he really just has Lianqi 8th level in cultivation? How can he have such a pure sword essence? There are so many geniuses in this world. Shixiang couldn't resist sighing. Just Lianqi and having such pure sword essence. His potential is limitless. And it was originally a gold sword energy, but it could transform into such an icy sword energy. Whose sect has such a disciple? Liang Luo was still staring in disbelief at Zuomo lying on the ground. Even now, he still couldn't believe a Lianqi disciple could have such a pure sword essence. For a sword xiao, the most important and the hardest to practice was sword essence. In the beginning, what they learned was all kinds of sword scriptures. After enduring countless battles and training, they would gradually comprehend sword essence. Sword essence was unable to be described in language. It depended on each individual to comprehend. Sword xiao that comprehended a sword essence were the only kind of real sword cultivators. Even if they didn't have a flying sword, they still were sharp and unstoppable. Sword scripture as a model, Ling energy as the connection, but the true quintessence was sword essence. Both of them had a cultivation of Ningmai, and had only just entered the doorway to sword essence. Suddenly seeing a Lianqi disciple having such pure sword essence, how could they not be shocked? Holding the cracked flying sword, listening to the curses of Wukong sword sect's female disciples, the person's face turned black and then white, harshly yelling, "All of you get out of my way!" The female disciples that had just been aggressive instantly screamed and scattered in fear. Only Xiaogua remained as she cried and unwaveringly protected Zuomo. That person held the flying sword, a face full of viciousness as he shouted at Xiaogua. "Get out of the way!" Xiaogua whined as she protected Zuomo, furiously shaking her head. "You bitch!" The other was enraged. Lifting the sword, he made to slice, frightening Xiaogua to close her eyes. Bang! Without a warning, the person suddenly seemed to have been hit by a large hammer. His entire body flew out 5 yards and didn't move. Committing a crime publicly in broad daylight. Which sect are you from? A calm voice suddenly sounded from behind Xiaogua. 2 Xiozha slowly came over, riding on green bulls. The one who spoke was Shixiang. With one move, Shixiang had intimidated everyone. Even the most idiotic person knew that the other's power was several levels higher. Fear came onto everyone's faces, but no one spoke. Shixiang heavily humphed in dissatisfaction. "Didn't you hear me speak?" At this time, a Xiozha trembled as he came out. He gave a bow responding, "We are the disciples from Dongqi Sword Sect." "Offending elder, sorry. Dongqi Sword Sect." Shixiang and Liang Luo exchanged a look, and imperceptibly furrowed their brows. Shixiang sneered. At what time Dongqi Sword Sect was able to freely harass the female disciples of other sects? I should go ask Zuomei Tian. Is this how he teaches the disciples? The name Zuomei Tian instantly caused everyone's expressions to change drastically, turning into terror. "Leave. If you do this again, don't blame me for not being courteous." Shixiang waved his sleeve and ordered for them to leave. The disciples of Dongqi Sword Sect hurriedly took their Shixiang and ran frantically as they left. Turning his face, Shixiang looked at the crowd of female disciples. In a warm voice he said, "Don't worry. This little brother is only suffering from exhaustion of Ling energy. Nothing major. Which sect are you from?" Chapter 30 Schemes. Greetings to both elders. We are disciples of Wukong Sword Sect. A sensible female disciple hurried answered. The other's cultivation was astounding, and he had helped them out of trouble. He shouldn't have any enmity. Wukong Sword Sect. Shixiang and Liang Rong's expressions instantly became strange. They hadn't thought that right after discussing someone else's sect, they actually saved the disciples of that sect, and it was a whole crowd. The two's gazes uncontrollably landed on Zhuomo's body. This little brother is? Shixiang tried to make his expression seem normal. In reality, his expression was still strange. This disciple lying on the ground only had a cultivation of Lianqi 8th level, and naturally could not be Wei Sheng. When did Wukong Sword Sect produce another genius? Shixiang was full of surprise. He had personally seen the apparition when Wei Sheng entered Juji. The picture of the sword energy rising to the heavens was deeply ingrained in his mind. Every time he thought of it, he would be in awe. Originally, he had assumed that all geniuses in the world would be so, yet what he saw today shocked him deeply once again. He had never heard of a Lianqi disciple that could comprehend sword essence. That disciple's sword essence was not whole. With his experience, he naturally could see at first glance that this disciple had just touched the door to sword essence. His sword essence could only be called in the fledgling stage. But this was enough to surprise him. Even more, this Lianqi disciple's sword essence was extremely weak, but it was extremely pure. This quality made him extremely puzzled. When normal Xiuzha comprehended the sword essence, at the very beginning, it was always extremely heterogeneous. Over time, through the trials of time, the trials of one's temperament, it would slowly turn to become pure. Just touching on the sword essence, and having such pure sword essence, it was something completely unimaginable. Thinking about his hard work these years, his heart didn't feel good. When did sword essence become something that even Lianqi disciples could play with? Wukong Sword Sect. This unknown sect suddenly became mysterious in Shixiang's eyes. A Wei Sheng who caused an apparition in Juji, and now adding on an unknown disciple who could comprehend sword essence in the stage of Lianqi. This is our Shixiang Zhuomo, the female disciple said proudly. Shixiang is the strongest in our outer sect disciples. The other female disciples all nodded their heads in agreement. What had just happened totally changed their impressions of Zhuomo. Zombie Shixiang might be a bit greedy, but he wasn't soft in the face of danger, and had a sense of responsibility. When Zhuomo had comprehended the sword essence and released that last blow, that terrifying presence made them feel deeply intimidated. Outer sect disciple. A vein throbbed in Liang Luo's forehead. A genius that could comprehend sword essence in the stage of Lianqi was only an outer sect disciple. He was very suspicious that he heard it wrong. Shixiang's expression froze as well before quickly returning to normal. The smile on his face became even warmer. As expected, it really is heroes come from the youth. Oh, I have a Ling restoring Dan. It's just perfect for this. Come, I'll help him use it. He took out a jade bottle from his bosom and poured out a Dan about the size of a mung bean. He got off the green bull, and coming to Zhuomo's side, he shoved the Ling restoring Dan in Zhuomo's mouth. Liang Luo stared with wide eyes at Shixiang's enthusiasm. Ling restoring Dan wasn't something cheap. One pill was 20 pieces of second-grade Jingshi. Even they only were given a specified portion each month. Shixiang actually gave it to a stranger. He stared dazedly at Shixiang, who seemed like a completely different person, feed another Ling herbs, and even aided him in absorbing the Ling herbs. Zhuomo slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes, he saw a strange face. He was instantly startled and unconsciously sat up. Little brother, don't be scared. We don't have malicious aims. The other said with a smile and flashed to the side. The befuddled Zhuomo stood up and suddenly found his body was warm. Wisps of Ling energy spreading through his body. The previous exhaustion had all been swept away. Seeing him wake up, the female disciples instantly crowded over, talking over each other. as they narrated everything that had happened. It was only now that Zuo knew he had been saved by the other people. He quickly went in front of Shi Xiang and Liang Luo to bow and give thanks. Many thanks to both elders for your rescue. This junior can't thank you enough. Little brother Zwa doesn't have to be so courteous. I felt you familiar at first sight. Just a minor thing, don't keep it on the mind. Shi Xiang smiled and responded. We are from Qi Sword Sect. Actually, Qi Sword Sect and Wukong Sword Sect aren't that far away. Everyone is like one family. Liang Luo wanted to roll his eyes hearing that. What was called not that far away? He had never heard that there was a Wukong Sword Sect in the surroundings. What was with Xixiang today? Why was he so strange? Zuo said gratefully. If the two elders hadn't lent their aid. Shi Xiang waved his hands, interrupting Zuo's words. We'll regard each other as the same generation. I'll call you little brother Zwa. Haha, little brother Zwa has a limitless future. Maybe it is us that are social climbing. Elder is exaggerating. Zuo couldn't understand the other's meaning. This kind of praises made him puzzled. Junior is only an outer sect disciple. There's nothing to speak of in terms of future. Shi Xiang brushed away his annoyance. Is it that little brother Zwa doesn't like us too? Elder, it really is irritating. Zuo couldn't help but struggle. In the world of Xiuzha, other than in the same sect, there wasn't any distinction of age between different sections. And there was no age in cultivation, and it was hard to distinguish from the appearance. Usually, most of it was divided by the cultivation. Those stronger were elders no matter their age, even though he couldn't detect the other's cultivation. But to be able to easily make that crowd leave. These two people were more than sufficient to be called elders by him. He was very sensible, like that little thousand crane. If he hadn't been certain that the other wouldn't find him, he wouldn't have written such a reply. Right now, facing the others, he was naturally docile. Just at this time, Shi Xiang smiled and informed. You can call us Deji. I am Shi Xiang, he is my shitty Liang Luo. Zuo was incomparably obedient and bowed again. Shi Deji, Liang Deji. The female disciples all looked with admiration at Zuo. To have relations with strong Xiuzha, there were naturally many benefits. This elder in front of them clearly was admiring of Zuo Xixiang. Xixiang really hit the jackpot. As expected, they heard Shi Xiang continue. Since you have called me Deji, as the brother, I naturally have to have a meeting gift. This ice crystal sword. Even if it is 3rd grade, but its attributes lean towards cold and yin. I saw that brother's sword essence leans towards ice, and this flying sword is perfect for you. Under a crowd of drooling gazes, Zuo dazedly received this flying sword. The sword was about 2 feet and 7 or so inches. The body was translucent and sparkling as though it was carved from ice, and emitted cold air. A pie fell down from heaven, and hit him unconscious. The appearance of this flying sword wasn't ordinary. Zuo straightforwardly converted it to Jingshi in his mind. So many Jingshi. Shi Xiang kept giving looks at Liang Luo. Liang Luo helplessly reached into his bosom, and after fishing for a while, took out a folded seal paper with some pain. He threw it at Zuo, coldly informing, Spirit Traveling Seal. Zuo was so happy right now he almost fainted. He wasn't clear about the price of the flying sword, but he had some knowledge of the price of the Spirit Traveling Seal. The conditions for a person to use the Spirit Traveling Seal was not high. It was one of the rare paper seals that a Lianqi could use. Putting this seal on the legs, travel 1,000 miles without being tired. It was much faster than his flying paper crane. Carefully taking the Spirit Traveling Seal, he took a look, and determined inside that this was a 3rd grade Spirit Traveling Seal. Oh, this too were so generous. However, the suspicions in his heart increased rather than decreased. There was no such thing as uncalled for love in this word. These 2 items, any one of them was worth more than his entire wealth. The other had no reason to carelessly give to someone. This was what really puzzled him. Today we still have other matters, so farewell. After a few days, we'll go to Wukong Mountain to find you and have a drink. Shi Xiang smiled as he bid farewell to Zuo, and, along with Liang Luo, rode the green bulls as they quickly disappeared. Zuemo was dumbstruck. Seeing the two vanish, after a beat, he suddenly said to the female disciples, "Someone pinch me, is this a dream?" 7 or 8 hands simultaneously reached over. A shriek echoed on the mountain path. "Xixiang, what were you doing?" Liang Luo was slightly discontent. A spirit-traveling seal naturally wasn't anything big to him, but he wasn't so generous to give it to a stranger. If it wasn't that he was extremely trusting of Xixiang, he wouldn't have even paid attention. Sitting on the green bull, Shixiang was pleased. He is an outer sect disciple. What about an outer sect disciple? There are many outer sect disciples in this world. Liang Luo said unconcernedly. Shixiang glanced at Liang Luo. He asked in return, "What does Shidi feel about Zuomo's talent?" Liang Luo choked. A moment later he squeezed out a sentence. "Not bad, better than me." Shidi has no need to undervalue yourself. If you train hard, you will naturally win over him. Shixiang was afraid that his Shidi's confidence would suffer and comforted. He then said solemnly, "However, such talents, no matter in what sect, he should be one of the more important disciples in the sect. But he actually is only an outer sect disciple." Liang Luo wasn't stupid and instantly reacted. "Does Xixiang want to recruit him into our sect? Why can't I? Such potential. That Wukong sword sect hasn't recognized it. Wouldn't it complete us? An outer sect disciple entering another sect. If Wukong sword sect came up to our door, they wouldn't have a foot to stand on." Liang Luo knew what Xixiang said was true. The turnover rate and mobility of outer sect disciples were extremely high. Those that entered another sect were countless. If they swindled Zuemo over, Wukong sword sect could not move based on this. Such potential, are his elders blind? Could it be an elder purposefully putting him in the outer sect disciples to toughen? Liang Luo voiced a doubt. Shixiang answered, "Haha, remember how he answered when I praised him for his limitless future? What he said proved that the definitely wasn't put in the outer sect by the elders. Thinking about that, I feel there is another possibility. It is probably that he only just comprehended the sword essence, and his sect elders hadn't found out yet." Liang Luo's mind jumped. Then why didn't we just take him with us right now? If he returns to the mountain and something else happened, wouldn't it be ruined? Don't panic. I saw that he was very cautious of us, and there were too many people. If we try too hard now, it would be unlikely to succeed. It's better to back off first, and wait for a few days before we go find him. Move with feelings, entice with benefits. I'm confident it will work. Shixiang explained confidently. Liang Luo realized. Xixiang is wise. The two smiled at each other. Eldest brother. Chapter 31. Choice. Zuemo had come to Dongfu many times before, and would always window shop. However, to accompany women, especially a crowd of women to window shop, this required a very strong endurance of the body. Probably only those who cultivated the body could endure. Seeing that they brought everything they needed, Zuemo sneaked away. He first went to buy the gold ore. What Pu Yao had said last time, he remembered it. He also brought a jade stick full of basic seal formations. Even though there were teachings from the sect, but there were only just a few kinds. Seal formations were something that all Xiuzha had to learn. No matter if it was forging or making dan, it all required understanding seal formations. Zuemo brought them to create Ling fields in the future. Even if it was far away, the jade stick didn't cost much. The expensive one was the gold ore. 20 pieces of second-grade Jingshi was enough for him to suffer in pain for a long time, but he still decided to buy it. His attitude now was different than before. Before, he only looked at Jingshi. Even if he still liked Jingshi, but he put more importance on the future. After fourth Shirgu revealed it, he was clear that he couldn't return to the past. Those simple aspirations were completely shattered. He was walking on a road that he didn't know the destination of. What was waiting in the front for him? Breaking into pieces? Finding the answer? He didn't know. What had seemed fresh and exciting in the past was now dull and tasteless now. He found a quiet place to sit down, and started to think back to the last sword energy he had released. No one taught him. Even Pu Yao only made him experience it for himself. Towards Pu Yao, he only felt grateful. If there wasn't Pu Yao, He might not even have the chance to seek answers. Now that he had the chance, how could he not treasure it? He hadn't realized his own transformation. He suddenly understood some of what Wei Xingxixiang felt. Obsession, unrelenting obsession. Every time he thought about his appearance being changed, his mind erased. His wooden face would burn with pain, like it was reminding him there was a pair of hands that wiped away his face. Was a pair of hands that wiped away his memories. This burning that seeped in his bones made him unable to tolerate himself muddle-headedly living. He wanted answers. He was very clear just how low his starting point was. He didn't want to waste even 1 second. He thought of all the ways, worked over his minds, used all his cunning to make himself stronger, to let himself have greater power. He wanted answers. In the corner of the busy street, he serenely coiled his legs and mused. In the roaring sea of fire, Pu sat on the gravestone and lazily listened to the sound tablet. The female disciples finally brought all they needed. Everyone's faces were brimming with content. Zuemo finally released a breath. He was now in a rush to return back. Today's encounter let him have a taste of power. He desperately and impatiently wanted to keep training. But in consideration of the safety of these female disciples, he still sat on the flying paper crane and slowly followed them. But he still took grasp of each bit of time. Returning to the little yard, the first thing Zuemo did was put the black gold worm and the gold ore together, dig a small hole near the Ling vein, and bury them. After burial, he entered his consciousness. Facing Pu Yao, he said, "Pu, let's continue." Unexpectedly, Pu lazily said, "Continue? Continue what?" Zuemo blinked before quickly recovering his calm. "What conditions do you have?" Hee, it's so convenient talking with smart people." Pu smiled lightly and straightened. "This is correct. Where in the world are there free meals?" Hee, I want souls." "Souls?" Zuemo jumped in fear. Pu Yao's expression was relaxed and his voice carefree as he said, "Souls are good things. They taste fresh, full of vitality. Blood, human meat, they can't compare." Just a few words, and Zuemo became quite scared. In his mind, he couldn't help but think of those great monsters, eating raw human meat, pulling tendons, sucking marrow, eating souls. For a Xiozha whose dream was becoming a Ling plant farmer, things like souls were enough to make him jump out of his skin. No way! Zuemo resolutely refused. Pu Yao was truly a great monster, even though he wanted power. But he definitely didn't want himself become a servant of power. "Didn't you want to learn the sword?" Hee, other than the sword, I still have many other things to teach you. I have many talismans. Hee, as long as you have good souls, I can exchange all of it. Pu's crimson tongue licked his lips, voice full of enticement. "No way!" Zuemo suddenly relaxed. He sat down facing Pu Yao stating, "I'm not interested in killing people." "Oh." Pu Yao raised a thin eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. "You have to think clearly. Other people's lives. How can they be as valuable as yours?" Hee, it actually is very simple to kill another. Oh, one soul, and I will let you have a good comprehension of this sword essence, and can teach you many things. I just knew that you didn't have good intentions. Zuemo glared fixedly at Pu, coldly stating, "Pity you have the wrong plan." Pu Yao continued to chuckle. Zuemo suddenly felt his body tighten and couldn't move. "I'm wrong." Pu Yao suddenly raised his voice. Hee, so many years. No one has ever dared to say I'm wrong in front of me." He slowly walked in front of the unmovable Zuemo, his icy hands touching Zuemo's neck. "Afraid? Hee, great. I really tried many kinds and found that terror is the best flavor in all of the souls. Did you know? Souls that died with great terror. It's like a beautiful wine that fermented perfectly. Just eating it once, it is unforgettable." A cold finger swiped across the blood vessel on Zuemo's neck. Pu Yao's expression was mirthful. The crimson-red eyes flashed with craziness. Zuemo's body shook. He kept telling himself not to be afraid. But terror was like a spring that couldn't be plugged, furiously sprouting out. No matter how he tried, his body wouldn't move. Struggle is useless. Pu Yao was still smiling, his eyes cold. "Your stupidity really makes me disappointed. Didn't you know pets need to realize that they are pets?" He hated this feeling. Being manipulated, being controlled, his body not in control. Something in Zuomo's heart seemed to have lit up. Terror was swiftly taken over by anger. His blood seemed to have been burning. He couldn't help swearing. Go to hell. Such a stubborn little thing. Pu Yao shook his head and smiled, his right hand gently squeezing. Ah! Zuomo gave a wail. His entire person seemed to be bound by an invisible hand into a strange shape. The pain in his body was like countless thin needles piercing his body. His awareness started to dull. Just at that moment, a warm stream suddenly rose up from Zuomo's chest. Want to interfere? Pu Yao seemed to have found a naughty thing, and his mouth had a light smile. His entire body suddenly disappeared from his spot, and appeared next to Zuomo. His right hands easily thrusting into Zuomo's chest. Easily taking his hand out of Zuomo's chest, a 5-colored bead appeared between his fingers. This bead was the size of a mung bean. It looked like a rainbow glass, light swirling inside. Leisurely examining the small bead for a while, Pu muttered to himself. So it was this thing. Finishing, he prepared to crush the bead. Just at this moment, his hand suddenly stopped moving. Wisps of black smoke spread from the gravestone, slow and solid. In the blink of an eye, the sky above the sea of flames was covered by black clouds. The dancing flames seemed to be quite afraid of these misty black clouds. They shrunk down, a rarely seen sight. The star that was in the sky was also robbed of light by the black clouds. Pu dazedly stood motionless. An extremely complicated emotion floated in his bloody eye, seemingly sorrowful, seemingly happy, seemingly fond, seemingly furious. After a long time he said lightly, "You really want to choose such a piece of rubbish?" The black clouds moved, the layers roiling. The roaring sea of fire seemed to be suppressed, almost extinguishing, while that star in the sky had almost completely disappeared. Pu Yao stood like a tree, seeming to not have registered it. The black clouds became even thicker. The entire sea of consciousness was now a patch of black. Nothing could be seen. He suddenly sneered, the light flashing in his bloody right eye. You do know that to want to persuade me, it isn't that simple. The surroundings became quiet. The black clouds didn't give a response, and the two sides were deadlocked. After an unknown length of time, the light in Pu Yao's bloody right eyes gradually dimmed. He suddenly laughed lightly, and with the burdens of the ages he shrugged helplessly. It's always like this, so boring. His finger flicked, and the glass bead in his hands entered Zuomo's body. The black clouds instantly clear without a trace to be found. The sea of fire that lost its suppressor started to once again burn fiercely. That star in the sky gave off light. Pu Yao stared at the gravestone for a long time without speaking. Zuomo slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes, he hurriedly inspected his body. Seeing it uninjured, he finally gave a breath of relief. What had happened? Why did Pu Yao let go of him? Just when he was puzzled, Pu Yao suddenly appeared. You really took a long time to wake up. Pu Yao's expression was full of mockery. Such a fragile spirit. Originally, I had wanted to play. I hadn't bargained for a few thousand years. It ruined my fun. But it is normal. A person that doesn't have his features or mind, his heart naturally is also soft. I'm so pitiful. Zuomo was silent. His fists uncontrollably tightened. Speaking about it, there is a place that has souls, and you don't have to kill anyone. But it is very dangerous. How about it? Are you interested? Pu Yao's expression was leisurely. What place? Zuomo asked in spite of himself. Just now, Pu Yao's words pierced his heart. Hee, you don't need to know now. Don't worry, you don't need to kill anyone. You just have to say whether you agree or not. As to payment, when your conditions are enough, I naturally will let you be satisfied. I agree. He didn't think about it further. Zuomo nodded. As long as he didn't have to kill anyone, he wasn't afraid of danger. He didn't have anything else to lose. AI finally finished this transaction. For a few souls, this really wasn't easy. Business, not doing it for a long time. I really deteriorated. Pu Yao ruefully said in an experienced tone. Zuomo didn't know what to say. Pu Yao turned his face over. All right, let's discuss another transaction. Another transaction? Zuomo was full of wariness and some puzzlement. Jingshi, I require Jingshi. Pu Yao chucked. Want to experience sword essence? 10 pieces of second-grade Jingshi each time. How about it, isn't it cheap? Zuemo stared with a gaping mouth. Chapter 32 Refusal. The little dark gold sword cheerfully flew around Zuemo's fingers. It was extremely fast, leaving behind a dash of gold light, like a gold-colored lightning bolt. Zuemo's eyes showed happiness. Art of Aged Gold finally reached the 3rd level. After the 3rd level, the aged gold energy also transformed. The once dark gold sands became even finer and shinier. The gold sword that was formed even more exquisite. It was like a narrow fish, nimbly darting and swerving. The little gold sword was very small. The region it moved in was only his palm, and the sword moves were all very simple. There was none of the grand moves. However, if an experienced sword shio was here, they could be shocked to find that contained in the movements of this little gold sword was a faint strand of sword essence. Zuemo could also feel this small strand of sword essence. Other than joy, he couldn't help but feel pain. Returning home, no matter how hard he tried to remember, he still couldn't find the feeling of that last sword strike that day. With no other solution, he could only spend Jingshi at Pu Yao's to experience sword essence. 10 pieces of 2nd grade Jingshi each time. He spent all the Jingshi he had and finally comprehended a sliver of sword essence. It was this sliver of sword essence that caused his Art of Aged Gold to break through to the 3rd level. Compared to before, the present Pu Yao was a completely unscrupulous businessman that only recognized Jingshi and nothing else. He didn't know what really happened the last time. Why did Pu Yao release him in the end? It was clear that Pu Yao's attitude towards him had changed slightly. He seemed even more impatient, even hard to communicate with. If there was no matter about him and he was called, he would ignore. But for some reason, Zuemo felt the present Pu Yao was much safer, even though he needed to spend large amounts of Jingshi. Art of Aged Gold. Reaching the 3rd level meant that he only needed one more spell to reach the 3rd level before he could become a Ling plant farmer. If he became a Ling plant farmer, his status in the sect would be drastically different. The sect would supply him with large amount of resources, and then he could even more quickly increase his strength. The question he was facing now was what spell to choose to make a breakthrough. In the end, he chose Art of Flora. In the low-level spells, Art of Flora was renowned for its complicated finger motions. This was also the reason that Zuemo chose it. Finger motions, its trace could be found in almost all low-level spells. Low-level Shioja didn't have enough cultivation and frequently needed the assistance of the finger motions to completely cast. Even though after the stage of Jingdan, finger motions would almost completely disappear. But before that, finger motions was a very useful technique. Just as Zuemo was concentrating on practicing his finger motions, Pu Yao, sitting on the gravestone in the sea of consciousness, snorted and said to himself, "You just chose this piece of rubbish?" After practicing for a long time, Zuemo found that he was stuck at the same level. If he wanted to improve more, it was very difficult. His finger motions were actually very proficient, but it was always lacking flow. Thinking about the special feeling when he used Art of Flora to help Liang Feng Shiji and the others weed, he guessed that was the direction he should work at. But the profound feeling, similar to when he had released the sword at the enemy last time, no matter how he thought, he couldn't find it. Asking Pu Yao, it was a pity that Zuemo didn't have any more Jingshi. For the next following days, he still didn't have any ideas. The stubbornness in Zuemo's bones was aroused. Wasn't it just finger motions? He thought of a way. He took out a basin of water. Submerging both hands in the water, he started to practice his finger motions underwater. The feeling under in the water was expectedly different. The resistance was much greater. The finger motions, originally well practiced, instantly became scattered. Zuemo instantly became alert. He felt he found the direction. What he was most afraid of was not having a direction. If he could find the direction, he could overcome even the biggest problem. Just at this time, Shi Xiang and Liang Luo came to visit as they promised. The two's visit was very unexpected to Zuemo. He had originally thought the two were insincere, and just said it, and never though they would actually really come. Tuning my Shioja coming to visit a Lianqi outer sect disciple. No one would believe it. Haha, little brother Zua, It's only been a few days, and you've improved greatly. I think that very soon you would enter Zhuji. Shixiang smiled, and then with a face full of concern said, Have you prepared what you need for Zhuji? I have a few Zhuji Dan here, the grade isn't bad. Zuemo was even more cautious. Unreasonable attention, if it wasn't malicious it was robbery. The other was way too enthusiastic, and he automatically was on the defense. His mouth hurried replied, Shiji is too kind. Just a while ago, 4th Shirgu bestowed a Zhuji Dan, it's enough for me. Liang Luo and Shixiang quietly exchanged a look, but this didn't escape Zuomo's watch. Shixiang smiled responding, That's good, that's good. Inside, he thought that it was not going well. Had Zuomo's elders started to pay attention to his potential? Such a genius such as little brother Zuo would always attract attention no matter the place. Haha, when are you becoming an inner sect disciple? We can come and celebrate. He didn't give up and probed. Zuoemo shook his head. Our sect needs Zhuji before it is enough to become an inner sect disciple. It's still too early. Hope rose in Shixiang. The tone wasn't heavy, but it was full of a kind of determination. In his sea of consciousness, Pu Yao disdainfully spat out a word. Idiot. Disappointed expressions came upon Shixiang and Liang Luo's faces. But they also knew that it wouldn't be effective to speak more. They didn't have the interest in chatting, and after exchanging a few more words, they bid farewell. Sending away the two, Zuoemo returned to his little yard and stared into space. Then he continued to bury his head in practicing Art of Flora. The time passed by extremely full. Pu Yao didn't pay attention to Zuoemo. Zuoemo was happy to not be disturbed. If the devil didn't torment him, he thanked the earth and the heavens. Every day, he would travel to Cold Mist Valley, learn to care for all kinds of ling herbs. After Art of Aged Gold reached the 3rd level, the power increased greatly. He inspected all the ling herbs in Cold Mist Valley one by one, and found some deeply hidden pests. After spending effort to exterminate those pests, his Art of Aged Gold became even more proficient. He still couldn't imprint on the flying sword, so he decided to use the little aged gold sword to practice sword scriptures and ruminate on sword essence. In the water he practiced Art of Flora and reinforced his finger movements. All the other time, he devoted it all to embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The main use of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was to increase consciousness, but Zuoemo found that it could also increase ling energy. The effects were much better than his mainstream crappy 10 principles scripture. He basically abandoned 10 principles scripture and changed to cultivate embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Every day, he only rested for 4 hours. All the other time was put on cultivation, continuous cultivation. During this period of time, he wanted his Art of Flora to reach the 3rd level. After this little while, the new cycle of planting ling grains would arrive. He would be occupied. In that case, there would be much less time left for cultivation. In the basin of water, a pair of withered hands, from fingertip to wrist, were all immersed in water. The parts above the wrist were bare in the air. Zuomo's eyes were closed, exhaling and concentrating. Suddenly, the 10 thin fingers moved, fast as light, creating layers of undercurrents, the movements adding a kind of cold flavor. The speed at which the fingers moved was extremely fast. The surface of the water was like boiling water, countless undercurrents restlessly moving, but what was strange was that not even a drop splashed. The 2 wrists seemed to be made of copper, not moving a sliver. The nimbleness of the 10 fingers were astounding, the dazzling finger movements changing. The closed eyes didn't open. Zuomo's breathing unconsciously became heavier. The movements of his hands became even faster. The fingers under the water were unable to be distinguished. Splashes bloomed like flowers. The speed became faster. The collision between splashes suddenly became vicious. The water in the basin seemed to have been lifted by an invisible hand. The surface of the water completely raised up 2 centimeters. As the speed of the 10 fingers became faster, the surface became even higher. That pair of withered hands seemed to have a strange attraction, sucking the ball of water and holding it in midair. Suddenly, Zhuemo opened his eyes. The 10 fingers in the water suddenly became straight. Bang! The ball of water sucked onto the hands broke like a vase, turning into 10 bursts of water arrows, slashing out. Joy made its way onto Zhuemo's eyes. Chapter 33 The Spring Sprout Jade Metal Dongfu. As one of the 13 primary towns of Tianyujia, all kinds of authorities were very developed. Even though Tianyujia was governed by Kuan-Luanjing, and it was primarily made up of sword sects, but the requirements of sword Xiao to need all kinds of resources wasn't small. So while the core disciples of all the sects cultivated the sword, they would still try very hard to attract other kinds of Xiozha. Different Xiozha received different treatment. The same types of Xiozha would also receive different treatment based on their cultivation. Due to this, the evaluations of all kinds of professions were extremely important. It would be a very difficult thing to get a sword Xiao to determine the skill level of a ling plant farmer. For each Xiozha, after being professionally licensed, they could quickly find a satisfactory job in every location. All kinds of cultivators had their own authorities. The ling plant farmers had the Institute of Ling Plants. The beast speakers had the Institute of Beast Language. Congratulations! It's very rare to see such a young ling plants farmer in Dongfu. And you have comprehended the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain. Your future is limitless. The ling plant farmer responsible for the exam smiled, as he gave Zhuemo a jade medal. Barely visible inside the medal was a small and tender sprout, 5 elements energy revolving around it. The jade medals of a ling plant farmer were sorted into 4 levels: spring sprout, summer flower, autumn fruit, and winter hibernation. There were even finer distinctions at each level, but those exams were extremely complicated. Many ling plant farmers only ever did the licensing for the 4 levels. Zhuemo joyfully took the jade medal. To get this jade medal, he really hadn't wasted all his effort. The ling plants farmer in Dongfu only had the authority to give out spring sprout jade medals. To get a higher level jade medal, he needed to go to a more prosperous place. However, in the short term, Zhuemo completely didn't have to consider that problem. The leveling up of ling plants farmers was extremely hard. The summer flower jade medal required all 5 kinds of spells to reach the 5th level. Other than that, they needed to know how to create ling fields above the 4th grade. After giving thanks to the elder, Zhuemo decided to leave the institute. Just as he came out of the Institute of Ling Plants, numerous people instantly circled around. Mr. Zhua, our sect desperately needs a ling plant farmer. Is Mr. Zhua willing? Don't listen to him. He's only a small sect, can't give good benefits. Our sect is much more prosperous. You can ask for all the benefits if you are willing to come to our sect. The explosions of sound caused Zhuemo's head to turn to a mess. Just at this time, a deep voice suddenly interrupted. Sorry, excuse me. Everyone, don't block my Shiji 1. Sorry, please make way. The voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard it clearly. A hidden presence spread, and the crowd naturally made way. Just this cultivation was enough to make everyone stop talking. Seeing the smiling fat person not far away, Zhuemo's heart jumped, and he hurriedly went up to bow. 3rd Shirshu, and then bowed to Li Yingfeng behind Yin Lu. Shiji. The smile on Yin Li's face was harmonious and affable. He patted Zhuemo's shoulder. Not bad, not bad. Didn't think a ling plant farmer could come out of our sect. The sect leader will be ecstatic. If it wasn't that I had something to do in Dongfu, I'm afraid I wouldn't even know. At this time, Li Yingfeng added, when Shidi went weeding a short while ago, I knew that our sect would soon have a ling plant farmer. But I didn't think Shidi would be this fast. Shidi, congratulations. Just a fluke. Facing Yin Le Shirshu, Zhuemo was extremely nervous. A great monster was still living in his head. If Shirshu found out, he barely kept his composure, his mouth going. My luck was good recently. Originally, even I thought it would take longer. This clearly says that our sect is soon to rise. The smile on Yin Li's face became energetic. Let's go, today is a happy occasion. Pick whatever you like, it would be Shirshu's gift to you. Li Yingfeng smiled from the side, adding, Yeah, Shidi made this such an unexpected attack. As a Shiji, I didn't even have time to prepare a present. No, Shiji is too polite. Zuemo furiously waved his hand. Standing beside third Shirshu, he was extremely nervous and didn't dare to even breathe heavily. But third Shirshu started to talk and pull him at the same time. Of the wealthiest in the sect, third Shirshu would be the wealthiest. Third Shirshu had managed all the assets of the sect for many years and accumulated much wealth. Based on what could be seen now, Yanli Shirshu seemed to want to nurture Li Yingfeng Shiji into his successor. Zuemo felt this was pretty good. Li Yingfeng Shiji was straightforward and honest, knew how to conduct herself, and had a pretty good relationship with him. The store that third Shirshu took him to was naturally much higher class than what he normally shopped at. All kinds of talismans dazzled his eyes, a veritable feast. What he picked most of was jade sticks. For him, the jade sticks that recorded all kinds of scriptures and spells were what he needed the most. Yen Lu also noticed it, and his attitude towards Zuemo became even more amiable. The fact that Zuemo would get the spring sprout jade medal before he entered Juji was proof of his exceptional talents. After getting the jade medal, he wasn't greedy and lived it up. What he picked the most were still jade sticks. That meant that he had strong motivations to keep going. A young disciple that had both of those points, even if they didn't have good opportunities, they would definitely reach a pretty good height. There wasn't an elder that didn't like this kind of disciples, especially Yen Lu, who was used to the mediocrity of the disciples in the sect. He knew that there hadn't been any attention paid to this disciple in the past. If he didn't rope him in now, then he would be too stupid. Today, he had coincidentally been at Dongfu to take care of matters. Hearing that someone had received a jade medal, he had come over to see if he could attract them, and hadn't thought it would be a disciple of his sect. He couldn't help picking out a pile of talismans that Zuemo could have a use for. At the side, Li Yingfeng also recognized that even though her zombie Shidi hadn't entered Juji, but in reality, he had already become one of the core disciples. Maybe in the Wukong sword sect of the future, Weixing Xixiang would be in charge of fighting Zuemo Shidi of internal matters, and she would take over her master's role and be responsible for external matters, especially since no one could replace her and Zuemo in their roles. Looking at it now, Luo Li Xixiang was unable to threaten Weixing Xixiang's position. Also, Weixing Xixiang's relationship with Zuemo Shidi was extremely good. For the elders, they were naturally happy to see everyone cooperating. Li Yingfeng, who sorted out her thoughts, was also generous and gave 2 talismans to Zuemo. Zuemo's mind was completely blown. Holding a pile of talismans and jade sticks, his awareness was dizzy. Any item that he was holding now in the past was something he dreamed about. Now he was holding a pile in his hands. The affable smile on Shirshu's face made him think of a previous life. In the past 2 years, after the first time he met the sect leader when he woke up, he had never spoken to another Shirshu after that. And all of this, it was only because he received a jade medal. The gray-beaked goose flew steadily, its back broad and soft. It was very comfortable sitting on the top. Nothing that Zuemo's impotent flying paper crane could compare to. Little Emo doesn't have a steed yet, Yanli said and turned to order Li Yingfeng. I remember there are still a few more gray-beaked geese. Send one to Little Emo. Tell the people below to send over ling grass as necessary. Yes. Li Yingfeng noted it down. Zuemo thought to himself, their sect does have some wealth. When the 3 reached the gates of the mountain, the outer sect disciples had already lined up at the gates to welcome them. It was evident that the sect leader had already known of the news that he had received a jade medal. Their gazes as they looked at him were extremely complicated. Jealousy, admiration, dissatisfaction. Just a day ago, everyone was the same outer sect disciples. Today, they needed to come out to welcome him. Not many people had been surprised that Weixing Xixiang would become an inner sect disciple, since he had been the first among the outer sect disciples, and established a powerful image in their hearts. But among them, Zuemo hadn't been exceptional. Other than his little art of cloud and rain, and that face that never had an expression, there were very few places which he had that people would remember. Some of the people had caution and fear in their eyes as they looked at Zhuo. They had once bullied Zhuo, and was afraid he was going to get back at them now. Even the most stupid knew that it was certain that Zhuo was going to become an inner sect disciple. Seeing the looks of these people, Zhuo's heart wasn't comfortable either, but felt slightly relieved. He had finally left this group. That meant that he had made progress. For him, any kind of progress right now was incredibly valuable, and he didn't care about the looks of the other outer sect disciples. The gray-beaked goose didn't slow down, but followed the mountain path, past the outer sect disciples respectfully standing as it climbed. Wukong Hall was the discussion place of Wukong Sword Sect. Many of the main matters of the sect were held here. When Zhuo and the others arrived, the sect leader and the other Shirshu were already waiting in Wukong Hall, faint expressions of joy on their faces. The fact that someone from the sect could qualify for a Spring Sprout Jade Medal was definitely an unexpected delight. And such a young disciple, his future would be limitless. First there was Wei Sheng who had such outstanding talent, and now there was a disciple in Lianxi that could receive a medal. They were completely bowled over by joy. Facing so many of the Shirshu for the first time, Zhuo couldn't help but be nervous. Xi Yin Shirshu's pair of cold eyes made him feel there was a blade behind his back, his entire body frozen. Please. Please. Puyao, don't make a fuss now. Just as he was nervous, the sect leader Pei Yuan Ran opened. At the beginning when I picked you up, I didn't have too many expectations for you, and didn't give much care. To be able to achieve all this, it is all your own efforts and extremely rare. To not give up in such a hopeless situation, swimming against the current, very good. In our sect, whatever strength you have determines the level of treatment. You showed your potential, and so the sect will treat you better. Do not have hate. Pei Yuan Ran was very straightforward. The bits of hate in Zhuo's heart had dissipated much upon hearing the sect leader's words. This disciple doesn't dare, he said with his head lowered. Pei Yuan Ran nodded his head, and his voice became warmer. Now that you have a jade medal, you are the only Ling plant farmer in our sect. The treatment in the past is naturally not appropriate for you. I heard your fourth Shirgu say that you are responsible for the medicine fields of Cold Mist Valley now. This will depend now on whether you have the interest. From this day onwards, you are formally one of the inner sect disciples of our sect. You will receive the same allowance of Jingshi as your other Xixiang. Other than that, our sect's West Wind Valley has a patch of empty third-grade Ling fields. That will be given to you. The Ling energy is thick in the valley. You could move to live inside the valley, and try to enter Zhuji earlier. If you need anything, you can ask your third Shirshu. As to the Ling fields inside the valley, you can plant whatever you want. We will not interfere. You can also use the other empty Ling fields in the sect, but at the end you need to give 3/10 to the sect. Zhuo's eyes widened, his gaze stupefied. He felt that he was going to faint. The sect leader was giving an entire mountain valley to him? Refers to disciple of a younger generation? Means nephew. Chapter 34 Inner Sect Disciple Pei Yuan Ran looked at Zhuo, who was stupefied, and a mirth-filled smirk flashed at the corner of his lips. All inner sect disciples must have a master. Since you received the Spring Sprout Jade Medal, you should go under your fourth Shirgu's line. Your fourth Shirgu is skilled at making Dan. No one else in the sect can compare to her knowledge of Ling herbs. Even in Dongfu, she is famous for this knowledge. What do you think of becoming her pupil? Zhuo shook and instantly reacted. Bowing his head to Shifeng Rong, he said, "This disciple greets master." Entering fourth Shirgu's line, it was the best possible outcome for him. His skills laid in farming, and that is very beneficial for making Dan. The demands of Ling herbs in making Dan were very large. Stand, Shifeng Rong said lightly, her voice sounding like her usual iciness. Zhuo obediently stood. Shimmy, in the future, he'll be in your care. Pei Yuan Ran said solemnly. Xixiang, don't worry. I definitely wouldn't conceal any of my knowledge. But if he isn't willing to put any effort in, Xixiang cannot blame me. Shifeng Rong's cold words were like a basin of ice-cold water that instantly woke Zhuo from his joy. He suddenly had a bad feeling. The implication in Master's words made him feel apprehensive. Pei Yuan Ran nodded his head and spoke. This is good, turning to ask Zuemo. Do you have any questions? Zuemo shook his head rapidly to show he didn't have any more questions. Originally, he had wanted to ask if he could ask Second Shirshu if he had any questions about forging. He suddenly remembered that the snow-white sword essence that tortured him countless times and made him want to die, that it originated from Exanyan Shirshu? The words that reached his mouth instantly shrunk back. He felt that he was crazy. Why would he ever have such a stupid idea? Wasn't that walking straight into a trap? Pu Yao was still in his consciousness. After his fright dissipated, his brain instantly recovered its clarity. He felt that in the future, he had to be a bit more careful. He might be an inner sect disciple now, but if Pu Yao was exposed, he was certain that the first reaction of Exanyan Shirshu was to cut him up along with Pu Yao, subdue Yao and exterminate Mo. That was too terrifying. Even though he was not as terrified as he used to be when facing that sword essence, but that was only in his consciousness. In the real world, one blow from Exanyan Shirshu's sword was enough to tear him into countless pieces. Pu Yao might be arrogant in front of Zuemo, but Pu Yao estimated if he had to face Exanyan Shirshu, he would also be killed instantly. He still remembered the scene when Exanyan's sword cleaved the Black Sea. Pei Yuan Ran detected Zuemo's nervousness, but didn't put any importance on it. Which disciple in their sect didn't tremble when they saw the masters? The sect leader and the Shirshu were all very busy, even though it was a delight that Zuemo became a ling plant farmer. But the Shirshu wouldn't spend too much time on this matter. The sect leader gave a few more words of encouragement, and then left with the other Shirshu. Shifeng Rong moved away gracefully, and Zuemo hurried to catch up. Shifeng Rong didn't turn her head back and said, seemingly to herself, I have warned you, but in the end, you choose the road to walk. Since you are now my disciple, I naturally will have my demands. Your private matters, I will not interfere, but what I order to be done, you have to complete it. Following behind, Zuemo's heart almost jumped out of his chest as he answered. Yes. Go attend to your own matters. After a few days, I will send someone to find you, Shifeng Rong said. Zuemo carefully saw his master away, his heart very depressed. It seemed that his master wasn't easy to interact with. Returning to his little yard, he found the outside was full of people. Almost all the outer sect disciples were waiting for him. Aiya Shixiang's back. I had said it before. With Shixiang's talents, wouldn't getting an inner sect position be easy? Shixiang, this is a small token of little brother's regard. Not enough to pay respects, Shixiang. Don't look down. Zuemo's head swelled up. Originally, he had prepared to reject the gifts, but noticing the worried glances of these people, he accepted the various gifts. As expected, when they saw him accept the gifts, these outer sect disciples all gave expressions of joy. Knowing that they would disturb Zuemo, they only gave their congratulations and stayed for a short while before leaving. The little yard finally returned to its normal silence. Releasing a breath, Zuemo held a large pile of various gifts as he walked into the yard and put the gifts down. This entire day today was so fantastical. Taking out the spring sprout jade metal, he gently caressed it, feeling the fineness and smoothness of the jade metal. His body was very tired, but his mental state was still excited. The sect leader had divided an entire mountain valley to him, even though part of it was due to his ling plant farmer profession. But this kind of benefits was still very generous. Other than Wei Xing Shixiang, it probably would be him that had the best benefits. Suddenly remembering the jade box that he had buried in the ling vein of the seclusion room, he instantly became alert. Quickly running to the seclusion room, carefully digging out the jade box, he opened it for a look. The gold ore had disappeared as expected, and the black gold worm had clearly changed. There was a new additional mark on the pure black shell similar to a coin, extremely eye-catching. Zuemo ran into his sea of consciousness. Jingshi was one of the factors of strength, especially when he had at his side a money-grubbing Yaoma like Pu Yao. Pu Yao threw a spell fragment at him. This spell allowed him to control ling worms, and it was very short and easy to learn. Zuemo easily learnt the spell in a short amount of time. Zuemo treated the worm like treasure. If his own yard had a small section of Ling veins, it was possible there were more Ling veins in the Wukong Mountains. Every section of Ling veins were very valuable, even the thinnest Ling vein. Even though West Wind Valley had been assigned to him, but Ling fields, especially high-grade Ling fields, were in short supply. Just his master's place, it needed large amounts of Ling fields to support. The price of high-grade materials were just way too expensive. He had started to try to engage in business. The benefits of a Ling plant farmer was pretty good, but it wasn't as fast at earning jingsher like other kinds of xiuzha. The little section of Ling vein in the seclusion room had disappeared already. Zuemo speculated that it disappeared due to the black gold worm absorbing all of the Ling energy. Even though he had meditated there for a long time, the Ling veins hadn't been affected at all. It must have been that he was in Lianqi, and the amount of Ling energy he absorbed each time he mediated was a pitiful amount, so the Ling veins hadn't been affected. In the process of the black gold worm increasing its grade, it needed too much Ling energy, and in the end, caused the Ling vein to disappear. However, this caused the last regret in Zuomo's heart to disappear. The most valuable thing in this entire yard was this section of Ling vein. He decided to go take a look at West Wind Valley. West Wind Valley was located between 3 peaks, but as none of the 3 peaks were high, the sunlight that streamed into the valley was plentiful. Compared to the coldness and humidity in Cold Mist Valley, this place was much warmer and welcoming. Holding the copper medal the sect leader had given, Zuemo carefully avoided the Jinji along the road. The Jinji in this place wasn't as strict as Cold Mist Valley, but far beyond anything that a Zhuji cultivator could content, much less the little Lianqi cultivator that Zuemo was. But his spiritual power just had to be much stronger than the typical Lianqi, so the pressure he felt from the Jinji was much stronger than normal xiuzha. Carefully passing through the Jinji, he could see this was much more desolate than Cold Mist Valley. The geography of the valley was very flat. There was only a patch of about 20 mu of Ling fields. Based on the looks, it seemed to be 3rd grade, even though the weeds were growing all around, but there were still people who came to this 20 mu of Ling fields at intervals to take care of it. The grade hadn't dropped. 20 mu of Ling fields wasn't very much, but this 20 mu of Ling fields was going to become his personal property. The entire West Wind Valley was going to become his private property. In here, he could do whatever he wanted. This benefit was very generous. Looking at the Ling energy encapsulated in the Ling fields, and the enormous mountain valley that belonged to him, a feeling of satisfaction rose. The only regret Zuemo had was that there wasn't a waterfall here. If there was a small waterfall, it would be perfect. Looking at the old trees and weeds in the surroundings, his heart suddenly moved. Taking out the black gold worm from his bosom, he casted the spell. The black god worm spread out on the ground and started to slowly crawl. Since this place belonged to him, then if he explored it, it should be very reasonable. Honk honk honk. Zuomo's strange gong-like laugh echoed through West Wind Valley. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.